Chapter 364. A big chapter of 8,000 words, you know? The cold wind never stopped blowing through the mountains. The vast snow was dancing in the air almost forever. It was lonely, monotonous, and cold. Whether it was wind, frost, rain, or snow, whether it was midsummer or winter, the wind and snow here seemed to be always unchanged, with a desolation that seemed to howl to the end of the world. There was a mountain in the snow. There was a city at the foot of the mountain. The exquisite and quaint black city was silent under the snow, black and white, looking extremely mysterious and majestic. Strong wind, heavy snow, high mountains, and black city. Under the sky that seemed to be always gloomy in the northwest, this was an extremely shocking picture. Gu Xingyun stood on the top of the mountain facing the wind and snow. Kunlun was very big. But this mountain was the highest mountain in a radius of 100 miles. Standing here, the city was at his feet, the mountain was at his feet, and the whole world seemed to be crawling under his feet. Such a high position, Huading, Yuzhou, and all corners of the world were close at hand. Gu Xingyun could feel his absolute strength and see the absolute glory of Kunlun City. Jianghu State had already stood at the commanding heights of the world. And Kunlun City was at the highest point of Jianghu State. He stood at the peak of Kunlun City, looking down at the world. He had great achievements and unparalleled martial arts. Gu Xingyun laughed. His laughter easily passed through the heaven and earth, and echoed among the mountains and snow. Blood flowed behind him. Dozens of corpses fell behind him, and blood stained a large area of snow. Gu Xingyun turned to look at the corpses. There were not many corpses, but they all had different appearances and figures. Every one of them represented the peak power in the world. Every weapon was a famous magic weapon in the dark world. But now the weapons were broken, and the so-called invincibility all became corpses. Gu Xingyun looked at his arm. There was a black arm guard wrapped around his arm, ferocious and gloomy. This was the human emperor, known as the first murderous weapon in the dark world. Gu Xingyun continued to laugh wildly, arrogantly and presumptuously. At his feet, the famous sword of the Wang family of Beihai, listen to the sea, had been broken into two pieces. The body of Sword Emperor Wang Tianzong of Jianghu State was almost completely submerged in the wind and snow. After Wang Tianzong, it was Li Honghe, Li Guangtu deity Lin Fengting, the master of Samsara Palace, tyrant of the Polar Ground Alliance, Saint War Angel Arceus of the Vatican, Cass Rotter, the god of war of Star State. Each and every famous name had now become a dead man. Gu Xingyun sneered and admired his work. He looked at the corpses one by one, and his expression became more and more satisfied. From beginning to end, when he saw the last corpse, Gu Xingyun frowned. He felt like he had overlooked something. It seemed like there was someone missing from these corpses. Who is missing? Who is still alive? He counted again. Wang Tianzong, Li Honghe, Li Guangtu, Summer Solstice, Situ Cangyue, and even Li Shi's body were here. He couldn't remember who was missing. Gu Xingyun snorted coldly and said in a cold tone, "They should all be killed." He looked at the horizon. A ball of orange light lit up at the end of the gloomy and snowy world. The moment he entered his line of sight, the orange light suddenly spread out and turned into an endless raging fire. The fire burned the whole sky. The biting cold wind and flying snow all stopped. The burning sky slowly pressed down, the mountains were collapsing, and Heiqing was on the verge of collapse. Gu Xingyun's body seemed to have lost all its strength in an instant. He could only watch the fire full of destruction falling down and wrapping him up completely. Heiqing suddenly collapsed completely. In the loud roar, the world was dark. Gu Xingyun suddenly opened his eyes and sat up from the bed. It was sunny outside the window. The bright light shone through the window and the room was clean and refreshing. Gu Xingyun's eyes were white, and his mouth and nose were full of the pungent smell of hospital disinfectant. He gasped for breath, and it took him a long time to realize that he had just experienced a dream. In the dream he was powerful enough to overturn the whole world. The 6 groups in Jianghu State suffered heavy losses under his operation. The Li family and the Wang family of Beihai at their peak were destroyed by him, and all the superpowers in the world surrendered at his feet. At that time he was very young, high-spirited, and arrogant. That was the most wonderful dream. But now looking back in the constantly disappearing dream, Gu Xingyun could only feel fear. It was like the fear after experiencing the most terrible nightmare. His heart beat wildly, his head was covered with cold sweat, and his mouth was dry. He took a deep breath and suddenly got up to find water. But as soon as he moved, the tearing pain all over his body suddenly made him fall off the bed. His body trembled violently and his mind was blank, but his heart was completely sober. He forgot the nightmare and remembered the night when he was attacked. Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan. Gu Xingyun gritted his teeth, endured the severe pain in his body, and moved back to the bed little by little. Like a wounded beast, he gasped deeply. Everything in his sight became completely clear. The room he was in was a ward. It seemed to be a single room, but at this time there were 3 beds side by side. His bed was in the middle, and on the left was Li Qingqing in a hospital gown. The young girl, who had just turned 20 this year, was pale, and her long eyelashes blinked uneasily. The sun fell on her with a kind of beautiful charm. She seemed to be in pain, but her breathing became steady. Gu Xingyun breathed a sigh of relief and looked at his unconscious daughter with complicated eyes. He turned his head and looked at the right side. Gu Qianchuan on the right side was also unconscious. Gu Xingyun glanced at him casually, and his movements suddenly froze. He stared at Gu Qianchuan lying on the bed. Gu Qianchuan was motionless, but there was nothing in the cuff of his clothes. Gu Xingyun had an incredible expression, as if he had seen a ghost in the daytime. There were hurried footsteps outside the door. The ward was pushed open, and a middle-aged man walked quickly into the ward with a solemn face. The man was handsome, but there was a very eye-catching scar on his face. He was slightly short and wore a lieutenant general's military uniform, looking extremely fierce and domineering. "Your Highness, are you okay?" The lieutenant general reached out and shook hands with Gu Xingyun, looking sincere and serious. But Gu Xingyun clearly saw a touch of gloating mockery in the other party's eyes. "I'm okay." Gu Xingyun's tone was cold. Yi Fengqing, the director of Huading Special Operations Bureau. He was one of the backbone generals of the Wang family of Beihai. Among the experts at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm in Jianghu state, his strength might not be the top, but he was a famous madman. Gu Xingyun was attacked in Huading, so Yi Fengqing naturally had to visit him because of his position. "It's good that you're okay." Yi Fengqing smiled, pulled a chair at random and sat down opposite Gu Xingyun. "Minister Zhang Qi is still investigating in Mount Dong. I have to say that the person who attacked you and Marshal Gu Qianchuan last night was really bold, but we haven't got too many clues yet. I wonder if you can provide us with some useful information? Oh, by the way, how many of your guards survived? I heard from them that you mentioned Li Tianlan's name?" Gu Qianchuan's face changed and he took a deep look at Yi Fengqing. Yi Fengqing still smiled, but the mockery in his eyes was undisguised. He said meaningfully, "Is it true that the god of war in Jianghu state was seriously injured by a young man?" "I don't know what you're talking about." Gu Xingyun narrowed his eyes. He thought of everything last night, took a deep breath and made up his mind in a short time. "I haven't seen Li Tianlan. I don't know the person who attacked me last night. This needs your Huading Special Operations Bureau to investigate. If you are short of manpower, you can report to the Special Warfare Headquarters, and Kunlun City can directly intervene." Gu Xingyun's voice was a little distorted and depressed. God knew how aggrieved he was when he said this. But he really didn't have enough evidence to pin Li Tianlan. If he continued to make trouble, the whole Kunlun city would become a joke for Li Tianlan's prestige. He could only hold back his anger. "We'll try our best." Yi Fengqing smiled, stood up and said, "That's it. Your Highness, have a good rest. I've informed Secretary Zhong and he will come to visit later." He turned and left the ward, his back unrestrained. Gu Xingyun looked at Yi Fengqing's back with a gloomy face, and the corners of his mouth twitched. After a long time, he muttered to himself, "This matter will not end like this." He couldn't find evidence to pin Li Tianlan. But Kunlun City now had far more strength than the Li family, and it had the same position as the Wang family of Beihai. If he couldn't find evidence, then he wouldn't look for it. He must die. He must die. This bastard, cut him into pieces and feed him to the dogs. A hoarse, painful voice with great resentment suddenly sounded in Gu Xingyun's ear. Gu Xingyun turned his head. On the bed on his right, Gu Qianchuan had woken up. He tightly covered his shoulder with one arm missing. His eyes were chaotic and his whole face was distorted. He was ferocious and almost crazy. Gu Xingyun's heart was filled with anger. He was attacked and fled, but as long as he could hold on, the problem would not be very big. Gu Qianchuan's lost arm was the root of Kunlun City's disgrace. The arm of an invincible realm expert on the holy list was cut off by a young man. In addition to showing that Li Tianlan was amazing enough, it could only show the incompetence of Kunlun City. "How did you end up like this?" Gu Xingyun frowned and asked. Gu Qianchuan froze for a moment. He could hear the dissatisfaction in Gu Xingyun's tone. His face turned red in an instant, but he didn't know what to say. Was he careless? Or was he too concerned about Gu Xingyun's comfort? This explanation was objectively acceptable, but in Gu Xingyun's eyes, it undoubtedly showed that he was useless. Gu Qianchuan lowered his head and clenched his fists. If you're okay, take Qingqing and leave Huading first, Gu Xingyun said calmly. Gu Qianchuan raised his head subconsciously. What about you? Me? Gu Xingyun laughed at himself. I'm afraid that before dark, the news that I was seriously injured by Li Tianlan will spread throughout Zhongzhou state. If I don't show up, there are even many people who say that I'm dead. How can I go? Where can I go? I must stay to participate in the final maneuver. Before that, I can't go anywhere. If it was in normal times, Gu Xingyun naturally didn't care about these rumors. But now he was really seriously injured and he was destined not to show up for a long time. In this way, these rumors were deadly enough. So it was impossible for him to leave Huading now. Even if he had to hold on, he had to hold on to the final maneuver. What about Li Tianlan? Are we just going to let it go? Gu Qianchuan's tone was gloomy. Let it go? Gu Xingyun sneered. He will die. And he will die in the maneuver. He didn't tell Yi Fengqing that it was Li Tianlan who attacked him, and he was not going to tell anyone. But it didn't mean that he would let it go. Let it go? How could it be possible? Gu Xingyun lowered his head, took out his mobile phone from the bag containing his dirty clothes, and dialed a number. Kunlun. In the majestic black city standing in the wind and snow, a white and delicate palm pressed the answer button, but she did not take the initiative to speak. The two ends of the phone were separated by the city, the wind and snow, the mountains and rivers, and the sea. There was only silence and numbness. Gu Xingyun seemed to have adapted to the other party's attitude, so on the phone, his tone did not fluctuate at all. Come to Huading. His tone was close to a command. What's the matter? Li Shi held the mobile phone in her hand tightly and asked numbly. Kill a man for me. Gu Xingyun's tone was cold. Didn't you say that you had nothing to do with the Li family? Very well, in the final maneuver, I will give you a chance to prove yourself. I want you to kill Li Tianlan in person at the scene of the maneuver. I don't want to hear nonsense. Come here right now. In the case that he was seriously injured, it was difficult for Gu Qianchuan to check and balance Li Tianlan. Kunlun City did not have so many deep foundations and secret troops with amazing destructive power. Even if there were, Gu Xingyun did not want to waste them on Li Tianlan. It was the safest choice to let Li Shi do it. When everyone marveled that there were 3 invincible realm experts in the high-end combat capability of the Jiang family of South America, only a few people knew that there were also 3 invincible realm experts in Kunlun City. There were only 2 invincible realm experts left in the Jiang family of South America. And there were still 3 in Kunlun City. What few people knew was that, as the governor of Kunlun City, Gu Xingyun was not the strongest expert in Kunlun City. In terms of strength, Li Shi, who came from Kunlun City and was favored by Li Guangtu in those days, was the strongest expert in Kunlun City. She had the 10th unique domain and the 24 moves of sword in her body. The numb and silent madam of the governor was the strongest expert in Kunlun City. Li Shi was silent and did not speak for a long time. What? Bitch, you don't want to do it? Gu Xingyun's tone gradually became irritable. Li Shi's hand holding the phone was still trembling, and her face was so pale that it seemed transparent. I have done it. She tried hard to control her emotions. 3 years ago in Heaven Capital, I killed him once. But he is not dead. Gu Xingyun said in a cold tone. Then you kill him again and finish what you failed to do 3 years ago. Otherwise, I can't guarantee Qingqing's fate. Li Shi's face became paler. Qingqing. Qingqing again. Her trip to Heaven Capital 3 years ago was related to her daughter, Li Qingqing. At that time, if she did not go to Heaven Capital, Gu Xingyun would put Li Qingqing in Heaven Capital and even arrange her to be with Li Tianlan quietly. That result was equivalent to fundamentally determining Li Qingqing's fate in the future. Her daughter would repeat her path, and the old things would be reincarnated again. So she stopped Gu Xingyun and went to Heaven Capital in person. And recently, Gu Xingyun asked her to go to Huading, which was exactly the same threat as that year. It was very despicable. But it was absolutely effective. After the matter in Huading is over, you will go to Snow Country on behalf of Kunlun City. I will return your daughter to you afterward. Gu Xingyun said and hung up the phone directly. Li Shi seemed to be drained of all her strength in an instant. She put down the phone numbly. After a long silence, she slowly turned around and walked out of the door. The wind and snow outside the door were still howling. The whole black city looked more and more gloomy. A maid came over and said respectfully and cleverly, Madam? Prepare the helicopter. Li Shi said numbly, I'm going to Huading. In the era of explosive communication, Any so-called intelligence was just a matter of a phone call or an email. If they were more cautious, it was just a matter of an encrypted phone call or an encrypted email. The attack on Gu Xingyun was a major event in Jianghu state. Major events were often not kept secret. So when the garrison of Huading, the police, and the Special Operations Bureau rushed to Winter Mountain together, Wang Xingxiao had already received a call from Yi Fengqing, the director of the Special Operations Bureau of Huading. When he received the call, Wang Xingxiao was still chatting with Song Ci in bed. But after listening to the content of the phone, Wang Xingxiao, who had been calm since he broke through to the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, changed his face completely. He kept the weird posture of answering the phone. Until a long time after Yi Fengqing hung up the phone, his movements did not change at all. There was no anger, no jealousy, no unwillingness. He sat quietly, and his eyes were full of surprise, doubt, and bitterness. What's wrong? Song Ci clearly noticed Wang Xingxiao's unusual behavior. She put on her pajamas and sat beside him. Wang Xingxiao was motionless and unresponsive. When Song Ci asked for the third time, he took a deep breath and glanced at Song Ci. You said. Wang Xingxiao's voice was a little erratic, but his eyes gradually became calm. If I fight with all my strength now, how strong can I be? Song Ci was thoughtful. Wang Xingxiao was at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. But he had a top inheritance and was at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm with wind and thunder veins. Such a person was strong enough to crush and even defeat all opponents in the same realm in any realm. How strong was Wang Xingxiao? Song Ci thought for a moment and said softly, if you fight with all your strength, you should be able to fight against the top half-step invincible realm now. Ordinary half-step invincible realm experts will not be your match. Really strong. Wang Xingxiao laughed, but it was a little self-deprecating. How am I now compared to Brother Jiang? Brother Jiang? Song Ci was a little confused. She thought for a moment and said uncertainly, Milord Dijiang? Wang Xingxiao nodded. Milord Dijiang is His Majesty's disciple. Now he has the combat capability of the invincible realm. He is about to become the youngest marshal in Jianghu state. Compared with him, you are still a little worse. Song Ci said cautiously. Yes, I am indeed a little worse. Wang Xingxiao whispered to himself, but compared with Gu Qianchuan, Brother Jiang is also a little worse. Song Ci was silent. Although Dijiang with double thunder veins had not entered the invincible realm for the time being, compared with Gu Qianchuan who had just broken through the invincible realm, he should be on par or slightly stronger. But Gu Qianchuan had been in the invincible realm for 8 years. He had stabilized his realm, further understood the 10 skills of true martial arts, and successfully entered the holy list. Dijiang was not in the invincible realm, so he was indeed a little inferior to Gu Qianchuan. But just a few hours ago, Li Tianlan attacked the Purple Gold Pavilion. He not only broke Gu Qianchuan's arm, but also forced Gu Xingyun to flee. Wang Xingxiao finally smiled bitterly, and his eyes became more and more confused. How did he do all this? Song Ci's face changed dramatically. It was not a big deal to force Gu Xingyun to flee. Gu Xingyun had been seriously injured. But it was really incredible that he broke Gu Qianchuan's arm. Had Li Tianlan entered the invincible realm? How could a 22-year-old invincible realm expert bear such a huge force? It's fake. Song Ci did not even think much and said instinctively. Wang Xingxiao glanced at her and did not speak. He could imagine how much influence the news would have after it spread throughout Jianghu state. A great uproar was not enough to describe it. If there was a word to describe it, it would be stormy waves. Li Tianlan still had potential. But after what happened tonight, he not only had potential, but his combat capability would also be recognized. He broke Gu Qianchuan's arm. Even if he was not in the invincible realm, he at least had the combat capability of the invincible realm. From now on, calling Li Tianlan Your Highness was really worthy of his name. And from today on, Li Tianlan had the value that all the young people, including Wang Xingxiao and Gu Hanshan, did not have. How did the gap come about? How could it get farther and farther away? Wang Xingxiao did not know, but he knew very well that if he did not fight hard, he might not even be able to see Li Tianlan's back. If it's true, Song Ci's face was a little pale and even a little panicked. Then in the final maneuver no. Wang Xingxiao whispered, he is really strong but not strong enough to make me retreat without a fight. But if you insist, who can guarantee that Gu Hanshan and Jiang Shangyu will also insist? Song Ci's tone was hurried. They are them and I am me. Even if they all abstain, I will appear on the battlefield. If I don't even have the courage to fight, I don't know what the Wang family of Beihai will become under my leadership in the future. Wang Xingxiao glanced at Song Si calmly. It was already the early morning of the 24th. There was less than a week before the final maneuver. I want to meditate. Wang Xingxiao said, it's time to get ready. No matter the outcome, at least I still have half a sword to choose. Song Si's face kept changing. Wang Xingxiao did have half a sword to choose. 3 years ago in Heaven Capital, he had used the sword intent of firmament to use the half-six paths. 3 years later, he had stood at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm and could barely use the half-reincarnation. Although it was the half-reincarnation. But as long as he drew his sword, Wang Xingxiao believed that even in the face of the invincible realm, he could be invincible. Dongqing Wudi flew back to Zhongyuan from Yuzhou overnight. But when the sun rose, Dongqing Hongguang, whose biological clock had always been very regular, went downstairs and saw his son in a marshal's uniform sitting in the dining room eating breakfast at first glance. Dongqing Wudi was dealing with the soup dumplings in front of him. He ate very slowly, chewing and swallowing slowly, but his movements were extremely firm. In front of Dongqing Hongguang he was a filial son. In front of Bai Qingqian he was an incompetent husband. But in front of the soldiers of Zhongzhou State, he was always the invincible god of massacre of Zhongzhou State. This was a man who could give people a feeling of indomitable will even when eating. Dongqing Hongguang, who had not slept in the second half of the night, gave up the plan to go out for a walk and walked into the dining room. He waved his hand, motioned his son who had stood up to sit down and asked casually, "When did you come back?" "Less than 2 hours." Dongqing Wudi swallowed the steamed bun and said calmly, "Did you hear the news last night?" Dongqing Hongguang picked up a steamed bun and whispered, "Yes." Dongqing Wudi laughed, with a kind of brilliance different from iron-blooded killing on his face. "Good boy," he cut off one of Gu Qianchuan's arms. Standing in front of him, I'm no longer his opponent. Amazing. If he grows up smoothly, he may really enter the invincible realm before the age of 30. Dongqing Hongguang also smiled, but there was some worry in his eyes. I said, the stronger he is, the more dangerous he is. If his injury last night was not serious, he should win in the final maneuver. But the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City? Kunlun City is not to be feared. Dongqing Wudi said, Gu Xingyun is seriously injured and Gu Qianchuan's arm is broken. There is no threat for the time being. Stupid. Dongqing Hongguang's eyes darkened and he said coldly, Gu Xingyun and Gu Qianchuan are not a threat, but how can you be sure that woman will not take action? That woman? Dongqing Wudi's face changed and he was silent. In a sense, the woman's breakthrough into the invincible realm was the most important opportunity for Kunlun City to make up its mind to overthrow Li Guangtu. If she joins forces with the Wang family of Beihai, she and Wang Tianzong, how can Tianlan survive? Dongqing Hongguang said slowly. Dongqing Wudi picked up a steamed bun and put it in his mouth. He slowly bit the steamed bun and said slowly, it's okay. Dongqing Hongguang glanced at him. Tianlan is still young and there are some things that he should not bear. The younger generation's affairs should be solved by the younger generation. If they want to bully the weak, they have to ask for my permission. He sneered slightly. Wang Tianzong? And that woman? She is really strong. But what can she do no matter how strong she is? Have you made up your mind? Dongqing Hongguang's tone was light. It's not determination. Dongqing Wudi smiled. Dad, this is the most correct decision. We may give up something for the time being, but only temporarily. If I don't make this decision this time, when the truth comes out, the people of the Dongqing clan will be disunited. Dongqing Hongguang was silent. Hidden Dragon Sea. After a long silence he suddenly said, I've met with the president. Dongqing Wudi said calmly, the president will go abroad for a visit in a few days. Dongqing Hongguang's face relaxed and he said with a smile, what are you going to do? It's just a head-on confrontation. Dongqing Wudi said, I'm ready. In addition, I've contacted Qin Weibai, and she will secretly cooperate with me on some things. Qin Weibai. Dongqing Hongguang's eyes flashed with inexplicable brilliance. She is indeed a strange woman. She is now in Snow Country and I don't know what she is planning. Snow Country, troubled times, great changes are coming. Dongqing Wudi chuckled. The real storm is coming, hey? Dongqing Hongguang smiled and his tone was complicated. Snow Country Mormons? Qin Weibai was looking at a document sent from Zhongzhou State. In the spacious study, a figure shrouded in a black cloak was holding a copy and looking at it seriously. There was not much content in the document. So in just a few minutes, Qin Weibai had put the document on the desk. Is my man powerful? Qin Weibai patted the document gently. She seemed to be in a good mood and her laughter was a little loud. Tianlan is in danger. The voice of the man wrapped in a cloak was elegant. His figure looked like a military counselor or a saint, but there were some differences. He put down the copy in his hand, hesitated, and reached out to tear off the cloak on his body. He said helplessly, "I'm really not used to this. How did the two military counselors and saint get used to this thing?" After the cloak was taken off, a handsome and elegant face appeared in the study. A face that should have been in Lin, and at this time. The patriarch of the Lin clan, Lin Fengting. They're not used to it either. Qin Weibai said with a smile, but they have to hide their identities so they have to get used to it. As the patriarch of the Lin clan, if you don't enter the secular world, you have to suffer for a while. Lin Fengting shook his head helplessly and pointed to the document on the table. Once the news gets out, Tianlan will be in danger. Tianzong and Kunlun City will definitely not let him go. Maybe they will take action at the scene of the final maneuver. He paused and said, "Am I too early?" "It's okay." Qin Weibai shook her head with certainty. Her voice was very soft and her tone was very confident. Dongqing Wudi is trustworthy. As long as he is here, Tianlan will be fine. You can only protect him for a while in Jianghu state. It doesn't make much sense. As long as the deterrent of the Dongqing clan is still there, no one will dare to act rashly. Between the top force and the super wealthy family, in terms of power, the super wealthy family is better. Lin Fengting narrowed his eyes and said softly, "Then what am I doing here now? It doesn't seem to make sense here. It's easier to find the headquarters of the Polar Ground Alliance from here. The Polar Ground Alliance is in civil strife, and the tyrant has become a coward. It's really not easy to find him. But I already have a clue, and there will be results in a few days. The final battle will be held in Snow Country, and the Polar Ground Alliance is the best signal." Qin Weibai said calmly. "You mean the final battle will be held in the headquarters of the Polar Ground Alliance?" Lin Fengting raised his eyebrows. "No." Qin Weibai shook her head and pointed to her feet. "The final battle will be held here. Snow Country, Mormon City." This was the final battle site that the Samsara Palace, which provoked the chaos in the Dark World, had set up 3 years ago. Lin Fengting just wanted to ask something and a phone suddenly rang. Qin Weibai looked at the number and answered the phone. "Boss." On the phone, a calm voice sounded. "The fish has taken the bait." Qin Weibai didn't say much and hung up the phone directly. Lin Fengting also heard the phone and asked subconsciously, "The fish has taken the bait. What do you mean?" "I sent someone to attack summer solstice. But I also said that I would give Wang Tianzong a chance to go crazy." Qin Weibai said softly, "So when I sent someone to find the headquarters of the Polar Ground Alliance, I deliberately used some bait to leak the headquarters of the Samsara Palace. Wang Tianzong has taken the bait." The headquarters of the Samsara Palace. Lin Fengting narrowed his eyes. "What's there? A tight dragnet? A trap?" "There's nothing." Qin Weibai shook her head. "There's only one opportunity for the final battle." Lin Fengting was silent for a while and then said in a complicated tone, "If so, it's not necessarily the headquarters of the Samsara Palace, is it? It can be regarded as the headquarters." Qin Weibai said, "It's indeed the place where the core members of the Samsara Palace have been stationed for many years. It can be regarded as the headquarters." She hesitated, glanced at Lin Fengting and continued, "The real headquarters of the Samsara Palace is in Jianghu State. It has always been in Jianghu State. I put it in the most conspicuous position but no one can see it." Chapter 365. Deity looked at the sky in Wangtian Pavilion. In the evening, the sky of Heaven Capital was gloomy. The wind was blowing and it was raining. Beni, the biggest typhoon of the year, was about to land on East Island from Heaven Capital. The roaring hurricane shook the whole city. Looking from above, the whole Heaven Capital was in a frenzy in the hurricane. Deity stood on the rooftop of Wangtian Pavilion, dressed in black. The gale close to level 10 was blowing and the rain kept falling, but it didn't shake his clothes at all. He just stood there in a trance. The roaring wind, the pouring rain, and the gloomy sky were all fake and he was the most real. Deity looked up at the sky. The rain was falling fast and the sky was gloomy. The night was coming and there was a touch of darkness in the sky. Deity, dressed in black, seemed to be integrated with the night, and the whole night seemed to become vivid. There was no light in Wangtian Pavilion. The headquarters of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital was the tallest building in the entire Heaven Capital. It was pitch black and looked extremely dignified and majestic. On a stormy night, the lightless Skyview Pavilion was like a black monster standing in the heaven capital. Occasionally, lightning flashed across the sky. Under the pale electric light, the black Skyview Pavilion looked somewhat ferocious. A white figure appeared in the pitch-black but vivid night. The white shadow walked up to the rooftop in a hurry. The moment he saw deity, he subconsciously slowed down. He held a letter tightly in his hand. Perhaps it was due to his excitement, but his eyes were extremely bright. His handsome and somewhat devilishly handsome face also became a little devilish because of this. Daybreak, the Sanluo Temple Master of Heaven Capital. He was also the person closest to deity in the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. This closeness was based on strength and relationship. The murderous weapon of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital, Shadow the Ripper, had always been in the hands of Daybreak. This alone was enough to show deity's absolute trust in Daybreak. Your Highness. Daybreak walked behind deity and said respectfully, "What are you so happy about?" Deity said with a chuckle. He was still looking at the night sky, and there was no smile in his eyes, only coldness. A letter from Jianghu State. Daybreak gave the letter in his hand to deity. Deity took it but didn't open it. He already knew what was going to be said in the letter. A lot of news could be passed to him by a phone call. But Jianghu State sent a letter at this time. He didn't need to read it to know that the contents of the letter were not what he wanted to see. Deity silently looked at the envelope in his hand. After a long time, he meticulously tore the envelope open and took out the folded letter inside. There were a few lines of familiar handwriting on the paper, but because it had been too long, they had become somewhat unfamiliar. The handwriting was firm and elegant, but the strokes of the pen moved freely, revealing a kind of unrestrained strength that flowed like clouds and water. The Purgatory of Heaven Capital cannot replace Tiannan. You can't replace this world either. Tianlan is already invincible. Why don't we lower our heads? Why don't you let go? The letter had no opening or ending. There were only a few sentences. Deity squinted at the last 8 words. He might as well lower his head. It was better to let go. His heart was a little cold, but he wasn't angry. He just focused on the letter in front of him as if he was thinking. How so? Daybreak did not leave. Seeing deity finish reading the letter, he asked casually. Deity stood quietly. Under the heavy rain, his clothes were dry and tidy, but the rain kept falling on the letter. The letter was gradually soaked, broken, and finally turned into scraps of paper, falling into the rain on the rooftop. He wants me to bow my head and let go. Deity's tone was calm. What do you think? Tiannan? Daybreak raised his eyebrows. Tiannan. Deity's tone became more and more indifferent. Daybreak suddenly fell silent. The chaotic sound of wind and rain still rang out. There was thunder rolling above the sky, and the atmosphere on the rooftop was oppressive and dull. I can't control it. Daybreak was silent for a long time before he said blandly. There were only him and deity here, so he spoke casually. You underestimated the extent of the old master's control of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. You also underestimated the tacit understanding between him and Qin Weibai. At that time we marched into Tiannan and now we can't stop halfway. You were set up by them. The situation in Tiannan is now out of control. Most importantly, you underestimated the speed of Tianlan's growth. A smile appeared on Daybreak's face. He spoke from the standpoint of God, but his eyes became brighter when he mentioned Li Tianlan's strength. This behavior was very weird, which was enough to prove his entangled position. The invincible realm at the age of 22. Such a result was enough to give everyone confidence. Moreover, I have the utmost confidence. Deity was silent. Just like what Daybreak had said. Heavenly South seemed to be in control, but in reality, it was already on the verge of losing control. The Dark Azura Hall of Breaking Dawn was now stationed in Tiannan and was the main combat force of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital in Tiannan. But most of the members of Sanluo Hall were the elites of the Eastern Theater of Operations who stayed in East Island in the final battle of Heaven Capital 3 years ago, pretending to be dead. They were Ning Ziyuan's men. In addition to the Sanluo Hall, the leaders of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital that had invested in Tiannan also had other origins. What was the Purgatory of Heaven Capital? It was a super force in the dark world created by deity. It was a behemoth that was constantly developing in East Island with the support of the East Island royal family. But in the end, the Purgatory of Heaven Capital was the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. 3 years ago, the Purgatory of Heaven Capital appeared in Heaven Capital. 3 years ago, the border war of Jianghu State broke out. 3 years ago, the Li family with the last afterglow, confronted the 5 major forces of the Dark World that invaded the border of Jianghu state. In that fierce battle, there were not many people left in the Li family, and some people were destined to sleep because of it. However, there were even more people who directly fell into purgatory after so-called death. They fell into the purgatory of heaven capital. After the real death there was eternal darkness. And after the illusory death there was real freedom. The purgatory of heaven capital in East Island appeared. The Li family of Jianghu state suffered heavy losses. Behind all these appearances, quietly, a decaying old force was transferring its power to a new super force. The combination of time was flawless. In 3 years or even more than 20 years, the veterans who fell into purgatory from the Li family became the backbone of the purgatory of heaven capital. To some extent, deity could not represent the purgatory of heaven capital. Deity represented only deity. Deity and these veterans were the most complete purgatory of heaven capital. This was the purgatory of heaven capital, and also the Li family after Nirvana rebirth. The layout of Tianan was the first step for the purgatory of heaven capital to return to Jianghu state. If deity wanted to regain Jianghu state, he was bound to face countless conspiracies. Tianan was the most suitable entry point. So when Qin Weibai suggested that he march to Tianan, he did not hesitate. And in order to gain a foothold in Tianan, all the people he sent were the backbone who were most familiar with Tianan. Who was most familiar with Tianan? Naturally, it was the people who had stayed the longest in the camp on the border near Tianan and were familiar with Tianan. The people who received the order were in high spirits. Deity did not doubt the loyalty of these people. He could be sure that these people would listen to him completely. But the problem was that these people would listen to his orders, but they would also listen to Li Tianlan's orders. Li Tianlan grew too fast. Now he had the combat capability of the invincible realm. In this way the entire Tianan became a tailor-made base for Li Tianlan. Ning Ziyuan, who cherished the Li family, was transferred to be the commander of the Tianan Freedom Corps. Dijiang, the biggest resistance of the purgatory of heaven capital, had returned to the Wang family of Beihai. If there were no accidents, he would become the youngest marshal in Jianghu state in the near future and serve as the new commander of the Border Control Corps. But the Blood Battalion was still controlled by Dongqing Wudi. The new commander of the Blood Battalion, Thunder God, was a well-deserved core figure of the Dongqing clan. The Southwest Special Warfare Headquarters was occupied by Mount Shu. The Spirit Tortoise Group, the most elite terracotta army of Jianghu state, had been transferred to Tianan. What would happen when Li Tianlan arrived in Tianan? He would become the banker in the entire Tianan. Everything around him. Whether it was Jianghu state or the purgatory of heaven capital. To some extent it was his power. A 22-year-old young man, his current strength and future potential were worthy of absolute trust. He would occupy Tianan as quickly as possible and let the Li family shine again there. But the purgatory of heaven capital could not do anything. Deity. Li Tianlan. Everyone in the purgatory of heaven capital took it for granted that these two people could never have any contradictions or differences. Once deity made a move, the entire purgatory of heaven capital would be confused. Deity could not afford such consequences. Because he had his responsibilities. I will let go. The rain was heavier. In the roaring rain, deity's voice was a little vague. But I will not lower my head. At this moment he thought of the old man of the Li family in Qin Weibai. The old master had prepared for today's game for more than 20 years. But the most critical border battle was caused by the Samsara Palace intentionally or unintentionally. How long had Qin Weibai prepared for today's situation? You won't lower your head? Daybreak asked softly. His voice was a little vague and complicated. Is there still a chance? He whispered, Huawu is dead. There is a chance. Deity's tone was flat. Don't forget that I still have cooperation with Qin Weibai. He paused and said calmly, Do you know why I sent people to Mount Dibing to attack summer solstice? His tone was somewhat meaningful. Daybreak thought about it and his face suddenly changed. I know summer solstice's strength very well. Deity's tone was calm. I also know her state. The reason why I sent our own people to die is that the leaders that time were the 4 most powerful supermasters of the Samsara Palace. If I'm not wrong, it will be difficult for the 4 of them to participate in anything in Snow Country. So. Daybreak's tone was a little dry. The Samsara Palace is weak and is doomed to perish this time. As soon as the master of Samsara Palace and Qin Weibai die, I will take my time to play with Li Tianlan. He looked at Daybreak and whispered, The final battle in Snow Country will be very lively this time. Maybe in the end, A few half-step invincible realm experts will be enough to decide the whole battle. I plan to take you and Dawn to Snow Country. Daybreak, can I trust you? Phoenix won't go? Daybreak was stunned. Oh. There was a flash of tenderness in Deity's eyes. Daybreak opened his mouth. I will go with you. His voice was a little dry and his eyes were a little dazed. I was only 16 years old when I followed you. You used to be a marshal in others' hearts. Now you are His Highness in others' hearts. But in my heart, you are the big brother before and after the treason. The most respectable brother. He stared into Deity's eyes. You can trust me. But I need a reason. Why did I become like this? In my opinion, there is nothing wrong with Tianlan. Why don't you agree with him? His tone was very serious. He stared into Deity's eyes, fierce and serious, without flinching. Perhaps his eyes were too sharp. So Deity turned his head and looked at Heaven Capital, which was in the midst of wind and rain. Because he doesn't deserve it. Deity whispered. When he said this, his eyes were extremely stubborn. Chapter 366. Crossing the sea and the glacier. In the depths of the beautiful yet extremely cold polar region, two black-clothed men silently moved forward in the world of ice and snow. It was summer in the northern hemisphere, but the deepest part of the polar region was still full of ice. Glaciers lingered on the frozen seawater. The sun shone on the glaciers, shining with a dreamy luster. Everything in sight was white, transparent, and holy. The two men in black walked in a clean and pure world. Looking from a distance, they were like the two most striking black spots. They climbed over one glacier after another as if they were walking on flat ground. Summer in the Arctic was the polar day. Standing on the pole, front, back, left, right, east, west, north, south, they were all south. The moment the scorching sun set in the south, before the darkness fell, the sun rose again. There was no night in the polar day, only day. Time seemed to have lost its meaning. The two men in black walked all the way in the polar region in silence. The two black-clothed people were a man and a woman. The woman walking in front had a tall and voluptuous figure. Her entire body was wrapped in a black cloak, and from her back she could be said to be mighty and strong. The man following behind her was thin and even a little thin. The wide cloak was draped over his body, making him look empty, but vaguely giving off a sense of elegance. He silently followed the tall woman in front of him, silent like a shadow. The rising summer sun shone in the depths of the polar region. The sun dyed every corner of the polar region golden. A man and a woman climbed the glacier in front and stood at the top. The deepest part of the entire base suddenly appeared in front of them. This was the coldest place in the core of the entire polar region. The wind and snow whistled under the sun, with biting cold and sharp ice chips. A mountain appeared in front of the men in black. A mountain completely condensed from ice. It was not realistic to say that it was a glacier. In front of the two, it was simply an endless mountain range. The mountain range was tall and magnificent, boundless. The holy white and the sky seemed to be connected, which was a kind of breathtaking magnificence and magnificence. Behind the glacier was the core of the polar region and the endless deep sea, which was beyond human reach. It's here. After a long silence, the tall and plump woman took the initiative to break the silence and whispered, Barental Glacier. Barental. It was the ancient language of a small ethnic group in the northernmost part of the snow country. It meant the end of the world. The man behind the woman took off the cloak that made him uncomfortable. He took a deep breath. Under the sun, it was a handsome face that very few people in the dark world knew, but it was indeed standing at the peak of the dark world's martial power. Nice scenery. Lin Fengting looked around and chuckled. Maybe I should go to the South Pole after this. He had been to too many places over the years. They were beautiful, but there were very few places that were purer than the polar region. I like it here. There's no taste of the mortal world. It's like heaven but also like hell. You like it? The tall woman turned around and looked at Lin Fengting. The hood of the cloak was very big, and it perfectly covered her entire face. Her eyes were hidden in the darkness, and her gaze was a little blurry. Lin Fengting had already cooperated with Samsara Palace. But in the entire Samsara Palace, there was only one person who could pull Lin Fengting from Mormons to the deepest part of the polar region. It could only be the most mysterious master of Samsara Palace. Palace Lord doesn't like it? Lin Fengting laughed and looked at the Barental Glacier in front of him, which was connected to heaven and earth. From another angle he could also see the endless deep sea behind the glacier. The glacier was white. The sea behind the glacier was blue and a little black, with a kind of majestic pressure that made people desperate. It was black and white. It was like heaven but also like hell. Since you like it, how about I give the glacier to you? The master of Samsara Palace said. Everyone in Samsara Palace called Lin Fengting Mr., but others called him Mr. out of respect and politeness. But when the master of Samsara Palace said it, there was no emotional fluctuation at all. What's the use of giving it to me? Lin Fengting said with a smile, just take a look. Can I live in it? Living in it may not be worse than living in the headquarters of the Lin clan. The master of Samsara Palace pointed at the glacier in front of her and said calmly, this is what I'm looking for. Lin Fengting was stunned, looking at the magnificent glacier in front of him that seemed to occupy the entire polar region. The master of Samsara Palace asked him out just to say that she wanted to find something. Lin Fengting didn't ask what it was. With his strength, he didn't have to worry about anyone plotting against him. Until now, Lin Fengting didn't know that the master of Samsara Palace was looking for this glacier. Here, Lin Fengting was a little hesitant. Now in the whole dark world, perhaps he was the only one who knew the identity of the master of Samsara Palace. Lin Fengting had seen this mysterious master more than once in Lin'an. He knew her past and could foresee her future. Otherwise, he wouldn't have made the decision to let her control the Lin clan for the next 20 years. However, this woman's thinking was too imaginative. She had such a great advantage in some aspects that it was difficult for smart people to thoroughly understand her plan. This is the headquarters of the Polar Ground Alliance. The master of Samsara Palace said in a calm tone that could be said to be earth-shattering news. The real headquarters. It's inside the Barental Glacier. Lin Fengting's body shook instinctively. He suddenly raised his head and looked at the master of Samsara Palace. The headquarters of the Polar Ground Alliance? In the Dark World, it was not difficult to find the headquarters of the Polar Ground Alliance at all, because they were different from the Samsara Palace. This was an alliance. It was an alliance with Snow Country as the core, and its tentacles extended to more than a dozen countries in Eastern Europe. Its sphere of influence was super large but relatively loose. The headquarters of such a force could be said to be the most conspicuous place. In everyone's intelligence, the headquarters of the Polar Ground Alliance should be in the polar circle not far from Mormons on a glacier. It was not in the core of the polar region, but inside the largest glacier in the polar region. The distance between the two headquarters was at least thousands of kilometers. So, like the Samsara Palace, the headquarters of the Polar Ground Alliance in Mormons is fake? Lin Fengting was shocked and immediately returned to normal. After all, he was just an ally of the Samsara Palace. The Lin clan didn't enter the secular world. No matter how mysterious the Polar Ground Alliance was, it had nothing to do with him. That's also true. Because it is indeed the place where the Polar Ground Alliance handles daily affairs, but the headquarters here is more hidden. Only a few core figures of the Polar Ground Alliance are qualified to enter here. And some small-scale but sophisticated laboratories inside the Polar Ground Alliance are also here. The master of Samsara Palace explained meticulously. Lin Fengting suddenly smiled. You knew this place before, didn't you? Just some rough clues, very vague. This was not a place I paid attention to before. The master of Samsara Palace's tone was calm. Some vague clues can be found in the most hidden headquarters of the Polar Ground Alliance in a few days? Lin Fengting obviously didn't believe it. It's 3 years. The master of Samsara Palace turned to look at Lin Fengting. From 3 years ago, the people of the Samsara Palace were looking for it with those vague clues, until a few days ago. Lin Fengting looked at the glacier in front of him. There was nothing strange about the glacier, cold and holy. But inside the glacier was the headquarters of the superpower in Eastern Europe, or even the entire Dark World, which had the most complicated structure, or it could be said to be bloated. Lin Fengting felt it incredible. It might not be difficult to open up the glacier, but organizations with a long history like the Polar Ground Alliance had deep foundations, which were completely different from the newly rising Samsara Palace. Why did they need to build such a hidden headquarters here? The Samsara Palace needed to be hidden. In the final analysis, it was because they were not strong enough and their foundations were poor. The Lin clan was unknown because they were hiding from the world, and only their headquarters were hiding from the world. The branches of the Lin clan scattered all over the world were quite confident in their own territory. Just like the Wang family of Beihai. Their headquarters was in Beihai province on Mount Dibing. But for hundreds of years, who dared to provoke them? Most of the people with such courage were dead. That was the strength and confidence. The Polar Ground Alliance should have such confidence, but why did they build their headquarters here? If it was not because of the lack of confidence, It could only mean that there was a great secret here. Lin Fengting sat down on the glacier. The howling snow and ice chips in the sky suddenly stopped for a moment as he sat down. The world was quiet. Do you need me to take action today? Lin Fengting asked. Mormons was at least 1,000 kilometers away from here. It was the place of the final battle, but the master of Samsara Palace appeared here. No matter what her purpose was, she couldn't be here for sightseeing. Yes. The master of Samsara Palace nodded. To what extent? To kill Tyrant? Lin Fengting narrowed his eyes. The Polar Ground Alliance. Tyrant. He ranked 8th on the new divine list, holding the murderous weapon of Snow Country Mountain Shatterer. Both he and the murderous weapon were absolute power-type masters. When he attacked, he even had the courage to tear mountains and fill the ocean. The master of Samsara Palace ranked 4th on the divine list. But according to Lin Fengting's understanding of the master of Samsara Palace, if Tyrant held Mountain Shatterer, when Blue Sky Underworld was not around, the master of Samsara Palace could hardly be Tyrant's opponent under normal conditions. Even if she could win, she would inevitably be seriously injured. On the premise that Mountain Shatterer runs out of energy, seriously injure Tyrant. The master of Samsara Palace whispered, a living Tyrant is more in the interest of the Samsara Palace. Is there any interest in the Samsara Palace? Lin Fengting looked at the master of Samsara Palace with a meaningful look in his eyes. The dark world was in chaos, but the situation was getting clearer and clearer. Northern Europe, Tiannan, North America and South America were battlefields everywhere. The forces of the Samsara Palace were operating in various battlefields, so they suffered heavy losses. Before the final battle began, the Samsara Palace was already crippled. Now the flames of war were about to burn in Eastern Europe led by the Samsara Palace. Even the most optimistic people found it hard to believe that the Samsara Palace had any way out. Destruction seemed to be the only ending. Destruction was imminent. What was the use of the so-called interest? Of course. The master of Samsara Palace's tone was certain and firm. Only then did Lin Fengting remember that the real headquarters of the Samsara Palace was in Jianghu State. The real headquarters of the Samsara Palace is in Jianghu State. You are in Snow Country, so the real headquarters will definitely be handed over to someone worthy of your trust. I think I understand why Military Counselor and Saint didn't come to Snow Country. The real headquarters of the Samsara Palace is controlled by Military Counselor and Saint, right? The master of Samsara Palace was silent. The code name Military Counselor, as the name suggests, I can probably understand his position in the Samsara Palace. Saint, this title is interesting. Is he your disciple? Lin Fengting's smile was a little strange and playful, as if he had thought of something interesting. He doesn't recognize my martial arts. The master of Samsara Palace said blandly, and I have nothing to teach him. But there is a piece of information left by a real chosen one in the Samsara Palace. If there is no accident, that information is enough for him to step into the invincible realm at the last moment. Saint can also be regarded as a disciple of the Chosen One. The Chosen One? A touch of regret flashed in Lin Fengting's eyes. He knew who the Chosen One in the Master of Samsara Palace was. How do you explain that information to Saint? Lin Fengting asked in a complicated tone. The Master of Samsara Palace did not speak. Lin Fengting seemed to understand something. He nodded and said to himself, it turns out that Saint also knows your identity. So, it sounds like a deal between the Samsara Palace and the Saints? Silence responded to him. Then such a person is not worthy of your complete trust. So, everything in the Samsara Palace is in the hands of Military Counselor? Why do you trust Military Counselor? Lin Fengting seemed to be a chatterbox and kept talking. Because he is a smart person. The Master of Samsara Palace answered in a simple tone, as if she did not want to talk more. Lin Fengting thought for a while and nodded in agreement. He is indeed smart. The Master of Samsara Palace took out an ancient pocket watch and looked at it. The pocket watch had a complicated dial showing the time and date. The night of July 26th. It was already the morning of July 26th in Jianghu State. The Master of Samsara Palace raised her head and looked at the scorching sun hanging high in the polar day. Today you only need to help me block Mountain Shatterer. The Master of Samsara Palace said softly. Among the 12 murderous weapons, Mountain Shatterer was extremely powerful. Without Mountain Shatterer, Tyrant's strength would be reduced. The Master of Samsara Palace alone was enough. Tell me your plan. Lin Fengting said calmly, the whole plan. The whole plan is the Polar Ground Alliance. The Master of Samsara Palace said clearly, this is the battlefield I chose a long time ago. After today there will be new opportunities in the dark world. The master of Samsara Palace looked at the glacier in front of her and asked, "What is the Polar Ground Alliance?" Before Lin Fengting answered, she had already said to herself, "The so-called Polar Ground Alliance, the alliance is the most important. It is a super force supported by Snow Country and more than a dozen surrounding countries. The oligarchs of Snow Country, the wealthy families of the surrounding countries, and some dark forces in Eastern Europe form an interest group. The final battle in Heaven Capital 3 years ago was just a rehearsal. It can be regarded as the first half of the plan, and the second half is in Snow Country." Lin Fengting listened quietly. Everyone has ambition. The stronger the strength, the greater the power, and the higher the status, the more uncontrollable the ambition. It can be said that the Polar Ground Alliance controls the power of Snow Country and more than a dozen surrounding countries in some aspects. But is it really so? The Polar Ground Alliance was established by the Eastern European countries. It is better to say that the Polar Ground Alliance is constrained by the Eastern European countries. If you are a tyrant, you have the seemingly largest superforce in the dark world, but you have to face the constraints from Snow Country and other countries all day long. Are you willing to do that? What is a tyrant like that? Puppet. Lin Fengting blurted out subconsciously. That's why the Polar Ground Alliance had internal strife a few years ago. Because the Polar Ground Alliance also wanted to change, or Tyrant himself wanted to change. He set up the headquarters here and brought his most trusted subordinates here. He wanted to develop slowly and finally get rid of the shackles of various countries to become the only real tyrant in the dark world of Eastern Europe. The master of Samsara Palace seemed to smile, but her smile was a little cold. What the Samsara Palace did was to cooperate with Tyrant. But we moved a little fast. After seizing the opportunity, we accelerated Tyrant's plan by 10 times or even dozens of times. It was so fast that he didn't even have time to react. Lin Fengting just figured out a little meaning, and the master of Samsara Palace had made a clear conclusion. Tyrant's secret action was tantamount to challenging the bottom line of the Eastern European countries. The Samsara Palace secretly promoted and accelerated this process. The Samsara Palace might fail, but Tyrant would definitely fail. As long as Tyrant was seriously injured today and the headquarters here was exposed, the Polar Ground Alliance would not only have internal strife, but completely fall apart. The Eastern European countries waiting for the opportunity will use all means to deal with Tyrant. The powerful families of the Polar Ground Alliance will also fight for power and profit internally. The Polar Ground Alliance without Tyrant is still the Polar Ground Alliance. This is a great benefit that no one, including Snow Country, can ignore. Therefore, the Dark World will have a decisive battle in Eastern Europe, and the countries in Eastern Europe will also fight openly and secretly for the Polar Ground Alliance. If different countries want to rebuild the Polar Ground Alliance and get the real leadership, they will inevitably contact other superpowers. The master of Samsara Palace paused and suddenly laughed. Ha! Lin Fengting only felt his scalp tingle. He stared at the master of Samsara Palace as if he were looking at a madman. He suddenly wondered if his decision was right. It was the madman in front of him who took advantage of the opportunity of Tyrant seeking change and directly decided the place of the final battle for the Dark World that had been in war for 3 years. The most important thing was that even the war in the Dark World, it was also provoked by the Samsara Palace. What would such a final battle look like? All the countries in Eastern Europe would intervene secretly. More than a dozen countries would fight openly and secretly, and even kill each other secretly. Several superpowers in the Dark World had their own positions. The superpowers would form alliances, and the countries would form alliances. But the so-called allies could betray them at any time. This was a huge benefit that could drive anyone crazy. The Eastern European countries would go crazy. All the superpowers in the Dark World would go crazy. Tyrant would also go crazy. All the ambitious Invincible Realm experts would also go crazy. All of them. This would be an extremely chaotic era and an extremely crazy final battle. Compared with the final battle in Heaven Capital 3 years ago, this was the real general trend of the Dark World. Lin Fengting didn't know what such madness meant. Did it mean a new era after the end of an era? Or, he stared at the master of Samsara Palace. Not even for a moment. What are you looking at? The master of Samsara Palace's expression was hidden in the cloak, but her voice was a little colder. I really don't like you now. Lin Fengting laughed. The master of Samsara Palace didn't speak, but her aura gradually became cold. Her eyes were fixed on the glacier ahead. Be careful. Although Lin Fengting didn't like the master of Samsara Palace, he still reminded her. The master of Samsara Palace didn't speak. Her body completely straightened in an instant. The ice and snow roared past. The black cloak on her flew up and made a loud noise. Lin Fengting sat where he was, motionless as if he was extremely quiet. The master of Samsara Palace took a step forward. The whole space was suddenly torn apart. Her figure moved very fast. Under the bright summer sun, she turned into a black line. In just an instant she appeared above the Barental Glacier. The glacier was silent. The master of Samsara Palace opened her hands, as if she was embracing the whole world. An ethereal but extremely condensed sword intent condensed the moment she opened her hands. The sword energy rushed up to the sky. The vague and sharp sword energy traversed the whole sky and covered the glacier. The wind and snow on the ground were rolling wildly. The ultimate sword intent was rising. Finally it fell. In the depths of the polar region, the Barental Glacier, known as the end of the world, shook. Cracks spread on the glacier one after another. Huge waves rose in the sea behind the glacier. The earth shook and the mountains shook. The sword light spread to the extreme. The cloak on the master of Samsara Palace bloomed completely. Her body lit up. Boundless sword light was released around her in the most thorough manner, and the surging sword chi rained down in a frenzy. On the Barental Glacier, a piece of solid ice with a radius of thousands of meters suddenly exploded in a loud sound. A roar full of anger and majesty suddenly sounded inside the glacier. Then a louder roar sounded. It was a clear and strange gunshot. A ball of misty light lit up the glacier surrounded by sword light again. The light was dim, misty and illusory. With a subtle yellow color, it kept spreading in the sword intent of the glacier. Wherever the yellow light passed, all the glaciers and countless sword intents collapsed. The murderous weapon Mountain Shatterer with one shot. It was the late night of July 26th in the polar region. In the polar region, the scorching sun hung high in the night. Before the night passed, a piece of explosive news swept through the entire dark world like a hurricane. In the depths of the polar region, the headquarters of the Polar Ground Alliance in the Barental Glacier was completely exposed. The master of Samsara Palace entered the headquarters of the Polar Ground Alliance alone. The murderous weapon Mountain Shatterer opened fire. Tyrant, the leader of the Polar Ground Alliance, was seriously injured. The master of Samsara Palace was seriously injured. None of the intelligence mentioned Lin Fengting. And almost at the same time, inside the Polar Ground Alliance, many powerful families announced their withdrawal from the alliance at the same time. Snow Country also officially issued a statement that Tyrant of the Polar Ground Alliance was a traitor of Snow Country. Eastern European countries. They were obliged to help Snow Country kill Tyrant. Different news and different lives swept through the dark world. Everyone understood what the news meant. It meant that the Polar Ground Alliance, the superpower with the largest sphere of influence, the largest number of people, and the most bloated organization in the dark world, finally collapsed completely in just a few hours after several years of preparation. It also meant that the countries in Eastern Europe, including Snow Country, which had the largest territory in the world, had no dark power that could be used. Tyrant was seriously injured. The master of Samsara Palace was seriously injured. The murderous weapon Mountain Shatterer. The murderous weapon Blue Sky Underworld. The Polar Ground Alliance. The Samsara Palace. All the interests were in Eastern Europe at this time. Overnight, it seemed that everyone had a reason to go to Eastern Europe. Chapter 367. It was stormy in Snow Country. The intersection of the Pacific Ocean and the Arctic Ocean was calm. The world was bustling. The sky was the most beautiful and the ocean was the quietest. Looking at the world from the deep sea 500 meters below, the world was like a picture that was frozen yet slowly flowing. It was colorful and breathtakingly beautiful. Wang Tianzong had stayed in this underwater world for 3 days. He rarely appreciated the scenery in the deep sea. Most of the time he was silent or meditating, silently adjusting his state. Under his feet was a deep-sea submarine that cruised in the Pacific Ocean and the Arctic Ocean all year round. Almost all of them were new models independently developed by Beihai Province. The whole submarine showed the standard extreme style of the Wang family of Beihai. The submarine was small in size and its combat capability was completely negligible. At the beginning of the design of the submarine codenamed Cloud, the designer did not intend for it to have any combat capability. Most of the places that could be equipped with weapons were modified into large and small engine cabins. For stronger stealth performance, Cloud even sacrificed a lot of armor thickness. There were only 6 such military submarines in the entire Wang family of Beihai, and they formed 3 squads. It was not because it was so high-end that the Wang family of Beihai could not afford it, but because it could not find a buyer at all. Such a submarine was completely abnormal. In terms of speed and stealth performance, Cloud was completely at the world's first-class level, but its combat capability and defense capability were also at the bottom of the world's first-class level. No country needed such a military submarine. Its only function was to search for resources in the deep sea more quickly and comprehensively. This was also the only use of the Wang family of Beihai to develop it. And now, Cloud, which was not well received even within the Wang family of Beihai, ushered in the most glorious moment since its service. Sword Emperor Wang Tianzong of Jianghu State had been quietly waiting inside Cloud for 3 days. It was already late at night on July 29th. There were less than 48 hours before the maneuver of the 2 academies of Jianghu State officially began. It was the 3rd day after Wang Tianzong appeared on the edge of the headquarters of Samsara Palace. The sea was calm. The deep sea was calm. Cloud was quietly suspended in the deep sea, motionless. Wang Tianzong, who spent most of his time meditating, opened his eyes from a somewhat narrow room, slowly came to the submarine cabin, and looked out of the window at the deep sea. The deep sea was not dark even at night. Less than 10 kilometers away, the light from the headquarters of Samsara Palace shone on the sea. The dazzling light pierced directly into the sea. The sea within a radius of tens of kilometers was brightly lit under the strong light. The brilliance was simply dazzling. Wang Tianzong silently looked at the light that reached hundreds of meters into the deep sea. He looked calm and thoughtful. "Your Majesty," Xian Ming appeared behind Wang Tianzong wanting to say something. Wang family of Beihai? As the head of all the intelligence agencies of the Wang family of Beihai, Xian Ming could be said to be Wang Tianzong's most trusted confidant. This position was not very dazzling, but it was extremely sensitive. There was almost no other family in the dark world like the Wang family of Beihai, which had gone through hundreds of years of trials and tribulations and had always maintained a rising momentum. The intelligence system of the Wang family of Beihai was even more huge and complicated. Sitting in this position, Xian Ming was like a pair of eyes hidden in the dark of the Wang family of Beihai. Wang family Shui Ocean. Ming and Wang. His Majesty asked very general questions, so he was not sure what he was asking about. Xian Ming thought about it and said slowly, "Snow Country is very lively. Or it can't be more lively." Within 3 days, Fantasy World, Knights Templars, the Jianghu family of South America, the Purgatory of Heaven Capital, the Heroes Club, the Shadow Throne of the European Union, the Dark Knights, the Men in Black of Star State, and almost all the forces appeared in Eastern Europe. At present, the Bays family in Eastern Europe has officially announced that Knights Templars is their ally. As time goes by, there will be more and more similar things. The Bays family in Eastern Europe. Before the collapse of the Polar Ground Alliance, the Bays family could be said to be one of the core components of the alliance. Its status was supreme in a small country in Eastern Europe. The collapse of the Polar Ground Alliance caused drastic changes in Eastern Europe. The wealthy families in the alliance, which had never been a monolithic one, were even more fragmented. The Bays family cooperated with Knights Templars, and other wealthy families would definitely choose to cooperate with other forces. Such cooperation seemed to enhance his own strength, but even Wang Tianzong could not predict what the final result would be. The situation was too chaotic. Even the Sword Emperor had to be careful in the chaos. If he was a little careless, the so-called Sword Emperor would be easily crushed by the general trend. Wang Tianzong took a deep breath and suddenly asked, "What's the attitude of Snow Country?" Silence. Xian Ming's tone was concise. Except for declaring the tyrant a traitor, Snow Country has been silent. How about Beihai Province? Wang Tianzong continued to ask. "It's fine for the time being." Xian Ming answered without hesitation. Even though he was deep in the sea in the past few days, he had never stopped contacting the outside world. His phone had been ringing 24 hours a day. The great changes in the dark world were just the beginning. Wang Tianzong's cautiousness and seriousness were transferred to him, which meant endless pressure and urgency. "It's fine for the time being," Wang Tianzong whispered to himself and sneered. It didn't seem a bad thing to be safe for the time being. But it was not a good thing. The geographical location of Beihai Province was extremely special, and the Wang family of Beihai was even more powerful. Although they were in Asia, they could be said to be close to Eastern Europe. When the upheaval in Eastern Europe and the collapse of the Polar Ground Alliance, other superpowers in the Dark World might not have the energy to take care of the Wang family of Beihai, but none of the wealthy families of the Polar Ground Alliance came to the Wang family of Beihai to ask for cooperation. This kind of unscathed was enough to explain some problems. Any news from Tyrant? Wang Qianzong asked. There's no news for the time being. Tyrant was seriously injured by the master of Samsara Palace that day, and we still have no clues. Xian Ming shook his head. Fine, Tyrant. Wang Qianzong was silent for a while and said calmly, after you get the news about him, you go to see him in person and tell him that the Wang family of Beihai can heal his injury and even help him borrow a murderous weapon. As long as he is willing to come to Beihai province to heal his injury, I can give him a chance to make a comeback. Xian Ming lifted his head with a surprised face. It was not surprising that Wang Qianzong drew Tyrant to his side. He was surprised that Wang Qianzong was willing to borrow a murderous weapon for Tyrant. The 12 murderous weapons in the Dark World could be said to be the only power that could be compared with the invincible realm in hundreds of years. The first murderous weapon, Human Emperor, opened fire on the border 3 years ago after more than a decade of silence. When Night Spirit was destroyed, Blue Sky Underworld sprayed sparks. In the final battle of Heaven Capital, the legend of Qin and the Shadow the Ripper had confronted each other. More than a year ago, the Dark Saint Judgment shook Northern Europe. Half a month ago, Setting Sun seriously injured Gu Xingyun. 3 days ago, after the sound of Mountain Shatterer, the Polar Ground Alliance completely collapsed. Thinking of this, Xian Ming was shocked. Only then did he realize that in just 3 years, more than half of the 12 murderous weapons in the Dark World had been in the state of energy storage at this time. There were still 5 murderous weapons that could be used. Which one did Wang Qianzong want to borrow? Almost without thinking, Xian Ming already had the answer in his mind. If the Immortality Potion, the Devil Troop, and the Heaven Punishment Troop belonged to the foundation of the Wang family of Beihai, then the murderous weapon that Wang Qianzong wanted to borrow this time was the friendship that the Wang family of Beihai had given to the outside world. It was recognized in the Dark World as a murderous weapon second only to the Human Emperor. Its power was not as good as the Human Emperor, but it was the fastest murderous weapon among the 12 murderous weapons. That was recognized as the fastest speed. Wang Qianzong drew Tyrant to his side. Tyrant was an ally. Who did Wang Qianzong want to use the fast murderous weapon in the hands of his ally to deal with? Xian Ming thought of the past of the Wang family of Beihai and all the peak experts in the Dark World today. He sighed in his heart. To deal with the former friendship with the former friendship? He looked at Wang Qianzong but only saw absolute calmness on his face. Xian Ming agreed in a low voice and sent a message with his mobile phone. He stood quietly behind Wang Qianzong and did not move. Wang Qianzong glanced at him. Your Majesty, today is the 29th. Xian Ming's voice was gentle. The maneuver of the 2 academies in Zhongzhou State will start the day after tomorrow. There's still time. Wang Qianzong was silent for a while and said slowly, What are you waiting for? Xian Ming couldn't help asking. Waiting for someone? Wang Qianzong's voice was cold. He suddenly asked, What do you think the form of the Samsara Palace's existence in the Dark World is? This inexplicable question made Xian Ming at a loss. He was silent for a long time before he whispered, What form? I don't know. Wang Qianzong shook his head. But I can be sure that no matter what form they are in, their existence is different from that of the Wang family of Beihai. The Samsara Palace is too mysterious and we have too little information. I can't determine the form of the Samsara Palace's existence, so I can't determine the value of this so-called headquarters. In this case, I'm willing to waste some time and wait for something more valuable. What do you think an injured person wants to do the most? Wang Qianzong answered his own question. Of course it's to heal. And it's to heal in the safest place. Where is safer than the headquarters of the Samsara Palace? It's not far from Snow Country. I think the master of Samsara Palace will come back. Wang Qianzong whispered, That's my goal. The dazzling light radiated in all directions with the headquarters of the Samsara Palace as the core. In the center of the exquisite and beautiful island, there was an information hall that controlled the security of the entire island. The light shone from the island to the surroundings. Wherever it passed, all the images appeared on the huge screen in the information hall. Not only the impact, but some abnormal signal frequencies would also appear in the hall after being detected by the radar. So in theory, the places around the headquarters of the Samsara Palace that were covered by the light, whether in the sky or in the deep sea, had no targets that could hide. Unless the other party's technology was far beyond the radar of the Samsara Palace. More than a dozen technicians of the Samsara Palace were busy in the hall full of instruments, searching for all the suspicious images and signals. Everything was normal within dozens of kilometers of the headquarters. The images were normal. The signals were normal. A bald middle-aged man quietly stared at a small screen in the big screen. On the screen, in the depths of the sea less than 10 kilometers away from the headquarters, an imperceptible signal flickered. The signal was not suspicious, because the signal sent by the other party was exactly the same frequency as the signal returned by the radar of the headquarters. The middle-aged man silently looked at the screen in front of him and finally opened a communication window on the screen. The communication was quickly connected. A tall and plump woman in a black cloak appeared on the screen. Her breath was weak and she was silent. "Your Highness, it has been confirmed that the Sword Emperor of Jianghu State, Wang Tianzong, has arrived at the headquarters. Now he is less than 10 kilometers away from us." The middle-aged man looked at the figure on the screen, bowed respectfully and said softly, "Confirmed?" On the screen, the tall woman under the cloak had a hoarse voice. "Yes, I can confirm," the middle-aged man said softly. He looked up at the small screen where the signal was concentrated. On the screen, the signal with the same frequency as the radar of the Samsara Palace flashed again. Nothing unusual. But the fact that there was nothing unusual was the greatest anomaly. The rise of the Samsara Palace was too short. In terms of technological development alone, even 10 Samsara palaces could hardly catch up with the Wang family of Beihai. So under normal circumstances, it was impossible for the Wang family of Beihai to search for the signal of the Cloud submarine. But in fact, the signal sent by Cloud Smoke had been flashing in the information hall of the headquarters of the Samsara Palace. For 3 days, it had not changed its position at all. It was not because of the advanced technology of the Samsara Palace that it could do this. The only explanation was that the radar used by the headquarters of the Samsara Palace was also the latest model developed by the Wang family of Beihai, and it had never been sold to the public. So the feedback of Cloud Smoke and the radar signal was exactly the same. Obviously Wang Tianzong did not know this. That was why he had been quietly staying in the cloud, waiting for the return of the master of Samsara Palace. The headquarters of the Samsara Palace had already known the location of Wang Tianzong's submarine. But the Samsara Palace did not intend to let Wang Tianzong down. On the communication screen, the woman in a black cloak stood up and said calmly, "I'm on my way." "Welcome." The middle-aged man's voice was a little trembling, with indescribable complexity. He bowed deeply to the screen. "Welcome back, Your Highness." The communication screen was hung up directly. The middle-aged man did not straighten up for a long time. His Highness was indeed returning. However, his return this time clearly had an unusual meaning. In the information hall, the staff stood up one by one and left the hall in turn. "Doctor, aren't you evacuating?" When the last staff member left, he subconsciously asked. "No." The middle-aged and balding doctor smiled. His face was very gentle. "I'm tired. I need to rest." The last staff member hesitated and turned to leave. The doctor turned around and adjusted the huge screen behind him to the maximum. Countless small screens disappeared on the big screen. On the whole screen, the whole scene of the headquarters of the Samsara Palace was clearly reflected. The palaces were continuous, and the birds were singing in a variety of patterns. The night was beautiful. A helicopter flew through the night sky and landed on the ground with the roar of the rotors. The hatch door opened and a figure wrapped in a black cloak slowly walked down. She was tall and plump, but it seemed that because of the serious injury her body was not straight. "Welcome back." The doctor looked at the man in black on the screen and muttered to himself, "Welcome to death." Returning was also a death. Chapter 368. Cloud was keenly aware of the signal that landed on the headquarters of Samsara Palace from a high altitude. The signal was a small red dot. This was the color of the signal that did not belong to them. It appeared on the screen of Cloud, and kept flashing. Finally, it completely merged with the dense signals of the headquarters of Samsara Palace and became completely still. Shen Ming, who was standing behind Wang Tianzong, was a little excited. He also had a complicated and nervous feeling of being involved in the general trend. He didn't expect that His Majesty had waited here for 3 days, and he really found his prey. Was it the master of Samsara Palace? If it was really the master of Samsara Palace who returned to the headquarters, what did it mean? In a few days after the collapse of the Polar Ground Alliance, the Samsara Palace was completely destroyed? From the fall of Night Spirit 3 years ago, to the final battle of Heaven Capital, to the 3-year war in the Dark World, the collapse of the Polar Ground Alliance, and the competition in Eastern Europe, if the Samsara Palace was destroyed today, how chaotic would the Dark World be? He subconsciously glanced at Wang Tianzong. Wang Tianzong's expression was calm and indifferent. He didn't know if the latest signal was the master of Samsara Palace. But he could see it. Take a look, Wang Tianzong said. Xian Ming picked up the walkie-talkie in the submarine and gave an order. The technicians of the Wang family of Beihai, who had been busy for several days and only needed the last step, broke through the network of the headquarters of Samsara Palace almost immediately. The firewall of the headquarters of Samsara Palace reacted violently. Alarms and warning signals appeared on every computer in the headquarters. The whole process took less than 3 seconds, and then the screen in front of Wang Tianzong suddenly turned dark. The headquarters of Samsara Palace had completely cut off the network. The process was very short. But Wang Tianzong had seen what he wanted to see. A helicopter was parked in the middle of the island of the headquarters of Samsara Palace. Beside the helicopter, a woman with a weak aura stood there wrapped in a cloak. The island was full of bright lights that could dispel the night. Her figure stood in the light, a little blurred and dazzling. Wang Tianzong narrowed his eyes. All the calmness and indifference completely disappeared from him. He stood quietly, but his whole person showed a completely indescribable sharpness. The grievances with the Li family many years ago, the friendship with the Lin clan, the loss after attacking Li Honghe, the anger after summer solstice was seriously injured by the sneak attack, and the threat brought to him by Li Tianlan, who was as amazing as the chosen one, everything was accumulated in the depths of his heart. After 3 days of meditation, his sword intent had reached its true peak. Wang Tianzong slowly turned around. Your Majesty, be careful. Xian Ming took a deep breath and said cautiously, even now we can't rule out that the headquarters of Samsara Palace is a trap. Wang Tianzong smiled and said nothing. He was the sword emperor of Jianghu state. With a sword in hand, there were no traps or conspiracies in the world. There was no day and night in the headquarters of Samsara Palace. The light seemed to surround this exquisite island forever. The sunlight faded. Light appeared. The dazzling light shrouded every corner of the island, illuminating everything. There was no day or night here, nor was there a starry sky. There was only light. The light had been alternating on the island for 3 days and nights. Countless light beams slowly rotated on the island. It shone on the sky and penetrated the ocean. The beam of light flowed in the night with a psychedelic trajectory. The helicopter landed at the highest point of the island. The area that could be regarded as a landing pad was not large, but it was extremely flat. The poor woman hidden in the black cloak stood quietly at the highest place of the headquarters of the Samsara Palace, overlooking the entire headquarters. The headquarters of the Samsara Palace was extremely beautiful. But the light was too pale, making everything lose its original color. She stood silently and did not move for a long time. Several figures walked over slowly in the light of the island. They came behind her and bowed in silence. The wind blew on the island. Her black cloak fluttered with the wind, looking a little cold. Under the pale light, she, dressed in black, was like a little black spot that should not have appeared. How is it? In the night wind, she suddenly spoke in a stiff tone. The devil troop has withdrawn a week ago. Most of our researchers have also left. Everything is ready. A man with a long sword on his back took a step forward and replied calmly. The man's clothes were as white as snow, which seemed to be completely integrated with the dazzling light. He was extremely handsome and had shoulder-length hair, which was not common among men. The night wind blew his hair, and the long sword on his back trembled slightly. His whole person showed a kind of outstanding handsomeness and wildness. He was a swordsman, one of the 12 super masters of Samsara Palace. She turned around and glanced at the swordsman. She also glanced at them. The swordsman was surrounded by experts who were famous in the dark world. Azura, the super master of the Samsara Palace. Azure Dragon, the super master of the Samsara Palace. Doctor, the super master of the Samsara Palace. In addition, there were several heavyweights who were not on the list of super masters but were no less important than the super masters in the Samsara Palace. Don't go? She asked. We are willing to die for your highness. Everyone said in unison. This time they did not bow. Everyone stood straight in front of her with a peaceful expression. Under the cloak, she turned around and looked at the undulating and rotating light column over the headquarters of the Samsara Palace. The light column shook the night with a subtle frequency, blurred and dreamy. Under the cloak, her eyes changed from trance to coldness. She lowered her head and looked at the sea. The sea was sparkling with the light. Her eyes seemed to pass through the sea and fall into the depths of the sea. There it is. She stretched out her hand and pointed to the sea. Boom, the whole sea suddenly shook. There seemed to be an unimaginably huge force surging and boiling at the bottom of the sea. The huge force, like a mountain and a sea, broke through the sea with incredible violence and strength. The whole island seemed to be trembling slightly. All eyes focused in an instant and stared at the sea as if they wanted to see through the bottom of the sea. The bottom of the sea was not the bottom. 500 meters below the sea there was water above and below. The majestic pressure was overwhelming from all directions, as if to completely obliterate all Wang Tianzong's vitality. The environment in the deep sea was quiet and silent. Wang Tianzong stood in the water as if he were stepping on the ground. The whole sea was surging silently. He could feel the crisp sound of his bones under the impact of the sea, and he could feel the sharp pain that his body would be torn and crushed at any time. But his eyes were still calm. Calm without any emotion. There were no ups and downs in the deep sea, but the extremely terrible turbulence went all the way south. Wang Tianzong's feet were like two anchors nailed to the deep sea. He stood steadily, adapting to the pressure that almost suffocated him, motionless. The sword intent stirred the sea with difficulty. A sword domain with a radius of a few meters appeared around Wang Tianzong's body. Wang Tianzong did not move or breathe. The huge tide around him roared past. Gradually adapting to the pressure, Wang Tianzong slowly took a step in the sea. The sea went south. He went north. Going against the water, the overwhelming water pressure seemed to become his power in an instant. His foot fell. The whole sea was boiling in an instant. The deep sea, with Wang Tianzong as the center, instantly turned into white waves all over the deep sea. A large area of the sea was completely twisted in the completely violent sword intent and power. The ever-growing submarine cloud was directly pushed out in the twisted sea. The unimaginable power spread from the bottom of the sea to the surface. The ebbing sea began to fluctuate and the waves were endless. Wang Tianzong took the second step forward. His movements were extremely slow, but his power and sword intent were getting stronger and stronger. Wang Tianzong held the long sword in his hand tightly. This was the sharpest famous sword of the Wang family of Beihai now. The sword was called Listen to the Sea. Listen to the sea in the deep sea. The third step fell. Wang Tianzong's eyes focused instantly. In the crazy and oppressive sea, he suddenly thought of his life and the glory of the Wang family of Beihai that lasted for hundreds of years. He thought of many people: Summer Solstice, Wang Xingxiao, Wang Yuetong, Wang Xiaoyao, Li Honghe, Li Guangtu, Lin Fengting. There were too many people. With a beauty by his side and a strong enemy by his side, he was invincible and powerful. What did he want in his life? The fourth step fell. The sword domain composed of pure sword energy expanded wildly, squeezing the sea. Water was the softest, but it was also the fiercest. The moment the endless sea was squeezed out, it pressed down with a heavier momentum. The sword domain struggled to maintain and was on the verge of collapse. His body seemed to be breaking and it became difficult to breathe. This feeling was so familiar. In a trance, Wang Tianzong laughed, which was extremely clear. He thought of what he wanted. Everything he had done in his life, including all the crimes, despicable, insidious, and shameless, was to protect the honor of the Wang family of Beihai. The honor and foundation that lasted for hundreds of years were so powerful, so vigorous, and so heavy. Heavier than the sea. He would not allow anyone to destroy this honor and majesty. Wang Tianzong's palm held the hilt of Listen to the Sea. The fifth step fell. He drew the sword. The bright sword edge went up. His figure was also going up. Wang Tianzong's eyes were condensed and focused. There was no emotion in his eyes, only sword intent. Samsara Palace? More than that. He wanted the whole world to see this sword stroke. So what if the Polar Ground Alliance collapsed? So what if Eastern Europe changed drastically? So what if the Wang family of Beihai had hidden dangers? When he was at his peak, everyone under his sword was like an ant, a piece of grass. The sword edge was unsheathed little by little. His figure rose little by little in the sea. This speed was very slow, but it was extremely heavy. At this moment, the sword emperor and his sword seemed to be driving the whole world. The world suddenly fell silent. Above the headquarters of Samsara Palace, the dreamy and blurred light column was still rotating, covering the entire island. The island was shaking. In everyone's horrified eyes, as far as their eyes could see, the sea area of at least 10,000 meters or even more was boiling like crazy in an instant. The vast sea was constantly shaking under the tremendous force, bringing up monstrous waves. The wind in the air completely stopped, and the whole world seemed to become an extremely violent but silent world. The vibration of the island was silent. The rolling of the waves was silent. The super masters of Samsara opened their mouths and could not make a sound. There was only sword intent in the air. The sword intent rushed out of the deep sea. It fell from the sky. The vast world was full of swords. The sea surface shook more and more violently. The sparkling sea surface gradually changed color, and the flashing light gradually turned pure white. The tremendous force completely stirred the seawater in the area of 10,000 meters. The seawater began to rise silently and overflowed the edge of the island. Everyone could only watch this scene helplessly. In the silence, there was an indescribable sense of powerlessness and despair. Boom! The loud sound, as if the world was broken, suddenly sounded at the moment when the sea surface boiled to the limit. The sky fell and the earth cracked. It was deafening. No one could see Wang Tianzong's figure. There was only the sea in front of everyone. The sea was completely overturned. The sea area of 10,000 meters rose at the same time with the crazy eruption of sword intent. The seawater was rising continuously and hitting the sky. What was the connection between the sky and the sea? This was not the scene at the end of the sight. In the loud roar, the endless seawater on the sea surface was like a mountain suddenly rising from the sea. The mountain was 10,000 meters high, and the sword intent was awe-inspiring, going straight into the sky. It was close at hand. But it was so high that one could not see the edge. Infinite sword intent. Boundless huge waves. The wild waves, like giant pillars supporting the sky, seemed to reach the end of the sky and then fell down wildly. The sword intent that broke out completely in an instant completely merged with the huge waves. The flying current went down 30,000 feet. Under the sword energy there was only destruction. This was the full outbreak of the Sword Emperor of Jianghu State. This was the peak sword of the Sword Emperor of Jianghu State. It surpassed the collision between a sword intent and deity when he was in heaven capital. It surpassed the 25th blade in the night sky of Lin'an. The sword energy was 10,000 meters long, mighty and mighty. 6 paths of reincarnation. One sword to dominate the world. The 10,000-meter-long sword energy fell from the sky, and heaven and earth seemed to be rotating. There was only one sword in the world. In the headquarters of the Samsara Palace, a large number of lights rotated in the trembling. The light illuminated the sky, the mountain-like towering waves and the sword. This sword was like a mountain, like a sky curtain. The most invincible sword. Boom! Countless beams of light rotated on the island, and a large area of smoke and fire appeared in every corner of the Samsara Palace. All the weapons in the headquarters of the Samsara Palace fired at the same time. In the smoke, the faint blue lightning was faint. All the superiors of the thunder-shocking realm were breaking out all their strength regardless of life and death. The huge waves, the sword energy, the sparks, and the lightning met in the air. In the rolling smoke, the blurred and dreamy beams of light were still rotating. The waves in the deep sea were towering, and the light on the island was disordered. The smoke, light, and sword intent covered everything. The whole island seemed to disappear completely. All the cannon fire and sword intent were completely shattered by the sword chi that fell straight down. The huge waves condensed by the sword intent burst into splashes all over the sky, but the splashes were condensed and did not disperse. They cycled between the falling waves. The sword intent did not dissipate but became stronger. On the island of the Samsara Palace, hundreds of beams of light suddenly went out and lit up again. The beams of light intertwined. At the moment of uncertainty, a silent but fierce sword light suddenly lit up in a trance. The sword energy and the huge waves fell between heaven and earth, straight up and down. But the sword light that suddenly lit up seemed to cross the sky and the earth. The extremely condensed sword light was like a crescent moon that was more than a kilometer long. The sword intent lingered, and every arc had natural beauty and dominance. The sword light was still falling. In an instant, the huge arc of light over a kilometer broke through the smoke and fire, flew out of the island and went straight into the sea. The sword light, with indomitable sharpness and determination, hit the huge waves that connected the sky and the earth hard. The huge waves that were as high as 10,000 meters suddenly trembled. Wang Tianzong, standing at the highest place, also trembled. The next moment, the huge arc of light suddenly shattered, and the sword intent diffused and dissipated. Wang Tianzong's 6 paths of reincarnation also weakened. But no matter how weak it was also 6 paths of reincarnation. The huge waves connecting the sky and the earth seemed to have changed, but it also seemed to have not changed. The seawater kept rising into the sky, and then fell down with the incomparably majestic sword intent. Water was the softest, but the water in the sword intent was as cold as ice and as hard as steel. The majestic sword energy fell in the center of the Samsara Palace. The sky and the earth shook together. All the light on the island disappeared in an instant. The sword energy pierced the island from the sky, then the island and went straight into the deep sea. Cracks appeared on the whole island in the continuous loud noise. The center of the island suddenly burst out a light that reflected the waves and the sword energy. The sword energy penetrated the whole island, and the land on the island was instantly broken. The land and stones kept flying, and it spread to the whole island from the center. The super master of the Samsara Palace. The woman in the cloak. It was a magnificent building. Flowers, trees, beaches, weapons, everything was fluttering in the sword intent. The 10,000-meter-high waves finally fell and hit the wreckage of the island hard. The island shook and sank completely into the deep sea. The boiling seawater flooded the entire headquarters of the Samsara Palace, and there was no trace of its existence. Wang Tianzong's body shook violently in the air. Because of exhaustion, his face was a little pale. But the whole island was completely turned into dust under his sword, and a small amount of wreckage had sunk to the bottom of the sea. Countless corpses floated in the sea and then sank. Wang Tianzong took a deep breath and listened to the sea tightly in his hand. In the distance, the cloud had emerged from the water and rushed in the direction of Wang Tianzong at full speed. Wang Tianzong slowly landed on the submarine and entered the cabin. "Your Majesty." Xian Ming rushed up at the first time and seemed to want to help Wang Tianzong. Wang Tianzong's power broke out too thoroughly, and he seemed to be a little weak and pale. But Xian Ming's eyes were full of irrational worship and fanaticism. "I'm fine." Through the submarine, Wang Tianzong looked at the sea that no longer existed in front of him. He listened to the sea in his hand and was silent for a long time. Xian Ming, who was full of excitement, stood beside him and resisted the desire to speak. He had never seen such a sword move in his life. What was His Majesty thinking at this time when he wielded the sword? "Xian Ming." Wang Tianzong suddenly spoke. "Yes." Xian Ming subconsciously straightened his body. Wang Tianzong looked out of the window, his eyes distant. After a long silence, he whispered, "People say that the 4 realms of martial arts are the foundation, and the invincible realm is the limit. What do you think is above the invincible realm?" Xian Ming's body shook violently, and his heart suddenly felt cold. Wang Tianzong shook his head and whispered, "Go to Huading." The submarine left quietly. There was no light on the sea and it became dark again. The tall figure wrapped in a black cloak had been dead for a long time. Her body was almost completely broken and her limbs were missing. The broken body rose and fell in the sea lifeless. Another submarine gradually emerged on the sea. A diver jumped out of the submarine, swam to the deep sea, picked up the broken body wrapped in the cloak, and dragged it into the submarine. There was a small conference room in the submarine. Qin Weibai and Lin Fengting sat face to face, and flaming fire stood behind Qin Weibai as usual. There were only 3 of them. There was a screen hanging in the conference room. The screen repeatedly played the scene of Wang Tianzong's attack not long ago. The shaking island, the overturned sponge, the huge waves that suddenly connected heaven and earth, and the sword energy that filled the world. Lin Fengting stared at the screen seriously. Apart from graveness, there were no other emotions in his eyes. "This sword move." After a long time, Lin Fengting slowly opened his mouth. His voice was a little hoarse. "I can't catch it. You've just tried. It turns out that you really can't catch it." Qin Weibai said calmly. Before the destruction of the headquarters of Samsara Palace, even Wang Tianzong thought that the huge arc of light was the dying counterattack of the master of Samsara Palace. It was her 24 moves of sword. But at the moment when the light and shadow intertwined and blurred, the huge arc of light was actually driven by Lin Fengting's sword. Lin Fengting was a little far from the island, so the sword energy was a little weak. Wang Tianzong just used one sword move, and he could continue to use the sword. There were all kinds of excuses, but in fact, even if Lin Fengting stood on the island, it was difficult to completely break the 6 paths of reincarnation no matter how many swords he used. Lin Fengting was a little depressed and lost in thought. He was lazy and aloof from the world, but it didn't mean that he really had no desire to win. He knew that he was no match for Wang Tianzong, but he never thought that under this sword move the gap between him and Wang Tianzong would be so huge. Wang Tianzong broke through. Qin Weibai said softly. Her voice was very soft, but the content was earth-shattering. Lin Fengting and Flaming Fire trembled at the same time. Of course, it's just half a step forward from the peak of the invincible realm. But this half a step is already enough to widen the gap that already exists. Qin Weibai's tone was a little complicated. The sword move just now came from the deep sea. Under great pressure it made Wang Tianzong go further. This is my miscalculation. If I'm right, the current Wang Tianzong is only half a level lower than Dongqing Huangtu in the past. In this era, it's really hard for him to find an opponent. Dongqing Huangtu, Lin Fengting smiled self-deprecatingly. The real chosen one. Obviously, Wang Tianzong is only half a step away from the real chosen one, or even infinitely close. Qin Weibai looked at the screen and said softly, in fact it's normal. The Wang family of Beihai has been glorious for too long. The longer it is glorious, the greater the pressure on the air. Now that chaos is coming, it's no surprise that Wang Tianzong broke through under such pressure. Lin Fengting smiled, took a deep breath and barely stabilized his mind. What should Tianlan do? He asked softly. The final maneuver is about to begin. Who can control Wang Tianzong? The Dongqing clan has the power to make Wang Tianzong afraid. Qin Weibai was silent for a long time before she whispered. Just afraid? Lin Fengting asked. If Tianzong has made up his mind, can Tianlan survive? Qin Weibai was silent. Silence itself was an answer. This is not a foolproof plan. Lin Fengting said. Who could have thought that he would break through today? If there is no breakthrough, the Huading maneuver is foolproof. Qin Weibai's tone was a little bitter. The door of the conference room was pushed open. An elite of Samsara Palace in a diving suit put half of the black body on the conference table, and then left in silence. Qin Weibai looked at the body on the conference table silently. The master of Samsara Palace did not draw her sword in the headquarters. So it was not the master of Samsara Palace under the cloak. But Wang Tianzong would not know this. Qin Weibai reached out and lifted the cloak on the body. The face of Shadowless, one of the 12 super masters of Samsara Palace, was revealed. She looked at Shadowless's body and took a deep breath. After today, Samsara Palace will turn from bright to dark. All the sacrifices are worth it. Unfortunately. She did not finish her words. But Lin Fengting knew what she was going to say. Wang Tianzong broke through again and his sword intent reached 10,000 meters. He was almost on par with the chosen one. If he had been a little closer at that time, even if he did not die today, he would have gained enough surprises. Unfortunately, Lin Fengting shook his head with a bitter smile. Am I going to Huading? No. Chapter 369. At night of the garden party, it was drizzling and scattered between heaven and earth. Wang Tianzong sat in the garden pavilion with flourishing flowers and looked at the falling rain outside the pavilion. He silently put down the phone in his hand and said nothing. Wang Xiaoyao sat opposite Wang Tianzong and drank. Seeing his elder brother hang up the phone, he said solemnly, "Brother, what did the president say?" What else could he say? Of course he praised the Wang family of Beihai. Wang Tianzong smiled and looked relaxed, but the mobile phone in his hand was tightened by him quietly. As the patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai, the most powerful wealthy family in Jianghu State, Wang Tianzong did not have many calls with President Li Huaqing of Jianghu State. Every time they talked, the two sides would not talk much. This time the president went abroad for a visit. This international call was not long, just less than 5 minutes. As Wang Tianzong said on the phone, President Li Huaqing praised the Wang family of Beihai. He mentioned the pillar of Jianghu State, the cornerstone of the country, and the merit of the Sword Emperor several times. Wang Tianzong listened silently. He knew that these praises were meaningless. What he cared about was what Li Huaqing wanted to say. Or Li Huaqing's attitude. Li Huaqing's attitude was only 4 words. He hopes that I can focus on national affairs. Wang Tianzong said. There was no emotion in his voice and his face did not change. Elder brother, have you decided? Wang Xiaoyao smiled and looked down at the wine in front of him. He is just a young man. Even if he is a heavenly son, so what? After all, he is still young. The life and death of a young man is not a national affair. Wang Tianzong's tone was indifferent. He came to Huading for the final maneuver of the 2 academies. On this day he had received many calls from the academics, the giant group, and even some people inside the Southeast group had vaguely tested his attitude. Wang Tianzong had made up his mind. So he did not show his attitude to anyone. His lack of attitude was his attitude. He must kill Li Tianlan. He was not going to give in or give face to anyone. The life and death of a young heavenly son is not a national affair. But isn't the life and death of a young heavenly son a national affair? Wang Xiaoyao asked. Although there were not many young heavenly sons, they were not the only ones. Wang Tianzong, Li Guangtu, Gu Xingyun, and others were also called the young heavenly sons of Jianghu state when they were young. But the fact proved that although they entered the invincible realm, they did not have the potential to become the real heavenly sons. Even among the young generation today, Wang Xingxiao, Gu Hanshan, and even Jiang Shangyu could be regarded as young heavenly sons. But there was only one true prodigy, Li Tianlan. The combat capability of the invincible realm at the age of 22. If he was given time, 10 years at most, he could even go to the top of the divine list in the dark world. At that time, Li Tianlan was only in his early 30s, enough to guard Jianghu state for at least a few decades. Was such a prospect not a national affair? So what if I do? Li Huaqing asked me to prioritize national affairs. But in my heart, national affairs were not important. Family matters are of utmost importance. Wang Tianzong said calmly, Jianghu state will lose Li Tianlan in the future, and someone will carry the flag of Jianghu state in the dark world. If the Wang family of Beihai had Li Tianlan in the future, how would Mount Dibing survive? How can we guarantee the safety of the 20 million people in Beihai province? His voice was not high, but it was getting firmer and firmer, like an unshakable rock. There is no right or wrong in many things. I am eliminating the future enemy of the Wang family of Beihai in advance. This is what I have to do. No matter what I have to face. Wang Xiaoyao lowered his head and was silent for a long time. The sound of falling rain outside the pavilion was louder. Drops of rain began to drift into the pavilion. Wang Tianzong turned the wine glass. Quietly, all the wind blew in the opposite direction with him as the center, and the rain around the pavilion was suddenly blown away. Have you thought about the consequences? Wang Xiaoyao suddenly asked. What consequences? Wang Tianzong's tone was cold. They will protect Li Tianlan alive. Because he is a heavenly son. A dead heavenly son is nothing. Is it the same for the purgatory of heaven capital and the Lin clan? Wang Xiaoyao asked. Wang Tianzong paused and narrowed his eyes. He looked up at the rain in the sky and said blandly, I am mentally prepared. Even if deity and Fengting appear on the scene, they can't change anything. If I want to kill, they can't stop me. Brother. Wang Xiaoyao looked at Wang Tianzong. His tone was a little strange. You are crazy. I am not crazy. Wang Tianzong smiled. You don't understand what the rise of a real heavenly son means to the Wang family of Beihai. He looked at his brother with soft eyes. You are not in my position, so you can't fully understand the glory of the Wang family of Beihai that has been passed down for hundreds of years. I am the patriarch. In my position, nothing is more important than the glory of the Wang family of Beihai. I'm talking about anything. Including me? Including Yuatong? Wang Xiaoyao looked into Wang Tianzong's eyes. Wang Tianzong narrowed his eyes slightly and said calmly, What do you mean? Wang Xiaoyao looked at Wang Tianzong for a while, then lowered his head and said in a low voice, Yuatong doesn't want Li Tianlan to die. I don't want it either. Wang Yuatong wanted Li Tianlan to live. Wang Tianzong could understand. But why didn't Wang Xiaoyao want Li Tianlan to die? Wang Tianzong looked at his brother. From the other's face, he saw pain and entanglement, as well as a trace of tenderness and yearning. Wang Tianzong understood and sneered slightly. Haven't you given up on that woman yet? Wang Xiaoyao held the glass tightly, gritted his teeth, and didn't look at Wang Tianzong. Aren't you a neat freak? Wang Tianzong said in a mean tone, She has been played by Li Tianlan. Isn't the woman he used dirty in your heart? She is not dirty. There was a bang. Wang Xiaoyao punched the marble table hard and stood up with red eyes. His elder brother's words directly pierced a fact that he was most unwilling to face for several years. Wang Xiaoyao seemed to be greatly stimulated. He opened his eyes wide and stared at Wang Tianzong. Wang Tianzong kept his mouth shut and just looked at his brother calmly. I don't mind. Wang Xiaoyao said in a hoarse voice, Elder brother, just destroy Li Tianlan. If he dies, little Bai and I really have no room. The light rain turned into heavy rain. The heavy rain was messily falling. Wang Tianzong looked at Wang Xiaoyao quietly and said nothing. Wang Xiaoyao finally understood that it was not his elder brother who was crazy, but himself. But he really liked and even fell in love with that woman. He fell in love with her charm, her coldness, and her every move. As long as he could get her, he really didn't mind that she was Li Tianlan's woman. She would always be a goddess, superior, inviolable, and blasphemous. Wang Xiaoyao knew that he was hopeless and crazy. Let him be crazy. Marrying her was king rational and dignified. The glory of the Wang family of Beihai that had been passed down for hundreds of years? Was it important? Maybe it was. But that was what his elder brother had to bear. It was not what he needed to bear. It had never been what he needed to bear. Elder brother, please? Wang Xiaoyao whispered. He had never been so humble in front of his elder brother who had always taken care of him since he was a child. Shut up. Wang Tianzong said lightly, sit down. His voice was not high but it was very powerful. Wang Xiaoyao clenched his fists tightly and sat down. You want to use Li Tianlan to threaten Qin Weibai? Even if she gives in, are you willing to get her like this? Wang Tianzong asked. Time will change everything. Wang Xiaoyao lowered his head and gritted his teeth. Time can really change everything. Wang Tianzong nodded with deep sympathy. But such a change is definitely not what you want. You threaten Qin Weibai with Li Tianlan's life. What can she do even if she gives in? Do you really think that Qin Weibai can't do anything if the master of Samsara Palace is dead? If she enters the Wang family of Beihai, decades later, when I die, the whole Wang family of Beihai may be surnamed Qin. Wang Xiaoyao's face changed. When he was about to speak, Wang Tianzong continued, I can forget what you just said. Use your brain when you speak in the future. Elder brother. Wang Xiaoyao's face changed. Pour the wine. Wang Tianzong knocked on the wine glass. Wang Xiaoyao silently picked up the flagon and poured a glass of wine for Wang Tianzong. In the pavilion, under the blurred rainy night, Wang Tianzong raised his glass to Wang Xiaoyao. The night rain was hazy. The bell rang in the garden party. The deep and clear bell rang throughout the entire garden party. Wang Tianzong glanced at the night sky. The bell rang. Midnight had passed. At this moment, it was the early morning of July 31st in Jianghu State. There were less than 8 hours to go before the final maneuver. Wang Xiaoyao raised his glass, clinked with Wang Tianzong's and drank up the wine in the glass. The warm wine was slightly cold. The midsummer at the end of July seemed to be a touch more chilly. The two brothers sat quietly in the pavilion. They had long been tired of the night view. The good wine was tasteless. The two brothers drank quietly, one glass after another, with worries on their minds. This year was destined to be a turbulent year for the Dark World and Jianghu State. The upheaval in Eastern Europe and the collapse of the Polar Ground Alliance affected the most. In addition to the Eastern European countries led by Snow Country, Jianghu State, which was close to Snow Country, was the most severely affected. The territory of the entire Dark World seemed to have begun to condense in just a few days. The fantasy world dominator Chaos appeared in Eastern Europe. The two invincible realm masters of the Jiang family of South America, nicknamed Jiangda and Jiang by the Dark World, appeared in Eastern Europe. The Vatican's Saint War Angel Arcis appeared in Eastern Europe. The president of the Heroes Club appeared in Eastern Europe. Cass Rotter, the god of war of Star State and the leader of the Men in Black, appeared in Eastern Europe. The Shadow Throne entered Snow Country. The battle between the Dark Knights and the Holy Sanctum started from Northern Europe to Eastern Europe. All the major assassin groups and mercenary groups in the world were ready to make a move. Eastern Europe seemed to have become a microcosm of the whole Dark World. Today, most of the forces of the Dark World had gathered there, and more than half of the invincible realm experts on the divine and holy lists had gathered there. The whole of Eastern Europe was like a powder keg on the verge of exploding. Once it exploded, Eastern Europe would be in turmoil, and even Jianghu State would not be spared. Jianghu State was the strongest country in the world. With such a huge force gathered in Eastern Europe, everyone seemed to have a reason to invade Jianghu State. Especially when Gu Xingyun, the state-protecting war god of Jianghu State, was seriously injured. However, everyone seemed to have forgotten. But it also seemed as if it did not dare to make a sound. Gu Xingyun was missing from Jianghu State. But there was still Sword Emperor in Beihai of Jianghu State. No one wanted to think of this suffocating name. But the Sword Emperor of Jianghu State appeared in front of everyone with his actions. Where the Pacific Ocean and the Arctic Ocean meet. The headquarters of Samsara Palace. He raised listen to the sea and the sword chi was 10,000 meters long. The headquarters of the Samsara Palace completely collapsed under the 6 paths of reincarnation. The entire Dark World seemed to be shrouded in the shadow of the 6 paths of reincarnation. This was the way the Wang family of Beihai took the initiative to declare force before the war was about to spread to Beihai. Therefore, the Wang family of Beihai released the video of Wang Tianzong's attack immediately. The recording was complete. However, the sword chi in the video was so majestic that even the video could not contain it completely. Everyone could only see the monstrous sword intent rising from the surface of the sea into the clouds and striking the heavens, but they were unable to estimate the specific power of that sword. Gu Xingyun had watched the video of that moment countless times. The sword chi entered the sky and fell from above, as if it had pierced through the heavens and torn apart the earth. The headquarters of Samsara Palace was a blur of light and shadow. Sword chi and light intertwined at the same time, and the entire island began to explode at the very center. The master of Samsara Palace. Samsara Supermaster. Samsara Headquarters. Everything was annihilated by this one sword. With just one sword stroke, the master of Samsara Palace died in battle. 3 super masters of Samsara Palace were killed. The entire Samsara Palace seemed to fall apart in an instant with this sword and completely disappeared in the dark world. Gu Xingyun watched the video silently. His face was dignified and solemn. It's like a miracle. After a long time, Gu Xingyun took a deep breath and said in a deep voice, Wang Qianzong is indeed invincible. But he is not as invincible as you think. The master of Samsara Palace is not as weak as you think. Li Shi stood beside Gu Xingyun and said in a numb tone, What do you mean? Gu Xingyun frowned and turned around. Wang Qianzong should have broken through. Li Shi said in a calm tone, but he has not completely surpassed the invincible realm. In the current dark world he has an absolute advantage over anyone, but he still lacks a trace of absolute dominance. The last sword stroke of the master of Samsara Palace is also very strong. Wang Tianzong's sword intent is the main reason for the explosion of this island, but there seems to be a self-destruct device inside Samsara Palace. Li Shi paused. The master of Samsara Palace should have wanted to die with Wang Tianzong. But unfortunately Wang Tianzong broke through half a step, and his sword energy was 10,000 meters long. The self-destruct device and sword energy on the island of Samsara Palace completely exploded. The master of Samsara Palace died without a burial place, but Wang Qianzong was not affected because he was too far away. The master of Samsara Palace is dead, Gu Xingyun murmured to himself and sneered. It's good that he died. It's good that he died. Li Shi stood expressionless and said blandly, It's not a good thing for you that Wang Tianzong's enemy died. The current Sword Emperor is so strong that even if he is not the real Chosen One, he is infinitely close to the Chosen One. He can be said to be the only god in the entire Dark World. If he pacifies Eastern Europe, Kunlun City will never have a chance to breathe. God. Gu Xingyun sneered and squinted at Li Shi. There seems to be a man in East Island who claims to be a god. Why isn't he the so-called god? Li Shi looked at Gu Xingyun coldly and said nothing. The upheaval in Eastern Europe is a crisis and an opportunity. It's hard for Jianghu State to stay out of it. I'm injured and can't travel far. After the maneuver, when Li Tianlan dies, you go to Snow Country on my behalf. Gu Xingyun looked at Li Shi and quietly changed the topic. Li Shi nodded expressionlessly. This was what Gu Xingyun had already said. Gu Xingyun closed his eyes and said coldly, I don't care what you do. But remember, what I want is the interests of Kunlun City. If you do well on the trip to Snow Country, I will give you freedom after I recover from my injury. If you don't do well, you won't have to see Qingqing in the future. He glanced at Li Shi and said meaningfully, I only want the interests of Kunlun City. Li Shi sneered and said nothing. She knew what Gu Xingyun meant. Gu Xingyun only wanted the interests of Kunlun City, which meant that in order to achieve her goal, she could attack anyone on this trip. In the absence of Samsara Palace, her opponents were the major forces in the Dark World. They were Sai City and other forces in Jianghu State. It was also the Wang family of Beihai. How could enemies and allies be so clearly distinguished? Li Shi was not angry, but this kind of cold smile made her a little less numb and a little more proud. Gu Xingyun was a little short of breath. He stretched out his hand and suddenly pulled Li Shi over, reaching out to tear Li Shi's clothes. Pa! Li Shi slapped Gu Xingyun hard in the face without hesitation. As the absolute seeded player in the maneuver of the two academies, Wang Xingxiao opened up a separate area in the Sky Academy. All his confidence and pride began to disappear in front of Li Tianlan's absolute strength. He was now at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. Li Tianlan had the combat capability of the invincible realm. Wang Xingxiao could hardly imagine how big the gap between the two was. The maneuver was getting closer and closer. In a short time, Wang Xingxiao knew very well that he could not catch up with Li Tianlan's footsteps. So now he no longer wanted to win. What he wanted was not to be defeated. At least he could not be defeated too badly. 6 Paths of Reincarnation, the most powerful unique skill of the Wang family of Beihai, was said to be one sword, but it could be divided freely. The former was 6 Paths of Reincarnation. The latter was Samsara. Wang Xingxiao had absolute confidence that as long as he could use samsara in the final maneuver, he would be invincible. So a few days before the final maneuver, Wang Xingxiao's voice completely disappeared. He stayed alone in his room, either meditating or tempering his sword intent. Song Xiai and Wang Xingxiao stayed together. In their residence, the fierce and crazy sword intent was increasing almost every minute and second. In the end, even the classrooms of the Sky Academy did not dare to approach this area, let alone ordinary students. As the sword intent in this residence became more and more violent, more and more people began to look forward to it. The heavenly son of Zhongzhou State. The heavenly son of Beihai. What kind of dazzling sparks would the collision of the two people produce? Would it be a one-sided crush? Or would it be an evenly matched fight? Everyone was thinking about this question. Song Xiai was also thinking about it. The night was getting heavier. The area where she and Wang Xingxiao lived was full of steady but violent sword intent. The night was quiet. Song Xiai looked at her watch. It was 3 o'clock in the morning. There were less than 5 hours before the final maneuver officially began. All the sword intent began to gather toward Wang Xingxiao's room. Song Xiai looked nervous and excited. She didn't know whether Wang Xingxiao had succeeded or not, but after several days of absolute concentration and meditation, she was sure that Wang Xingxiao must have gained something. She stood up subconsciously and hesitated to walk to Wang Xingxiao's room. In an instant there was a sudden change. The slowly gathering sword intent became completely violent in an instant. The sword energy madly gathered toward Wang Xingxiao's room, and then shot out of the room in the blink of an eye. All the furniture in the room and living room was completely smashed by the sword energy. The sword energy rushed out of the door and all the sword intent was completely out of control, bursting out in every corner. Song Xiai, whose face changed dramatically, rushed to Wang Xingxiao's room without hesitation. In the room, Wang Xingxiao had opened his eyes. His face was flushed and his head was sweating. Seeing Song Xiai rush in with a frightened face, he smiled softly, helpless and powerless. "What's wrong with you?" Song Xiai asked in a trembling voice. Wang Xingxiao's mouth moved. Puff. A mouthful of dark red blood sprayed directly from his mouth, staining the floor of the room red. It was still raining outside the window. It was getting louder and louder. The darkest time before dawn gradually faded. In midsummer, the morning light outside the window lit up little by little. Day and night alternated. Before the final maneuver, the night that was destined to be peaceful but extraordinary finally passed. Chapter 370. In midsummer, the sky in the north lit up earlier than in the south. When the sky and earth of Huading were still blurred between light and darkness, the sun had gradually appeared on Mount Dibing in Beihai. Mount Dibing was not high, but its location was extremely open. It was backed by the sea and overlooked Shenzhou. The rising sun rose from the sea. The sunlight fell on Mount Dibing and seemed to dispel all the shadows in an instant. Qin Weibai looked at the top of the mountain quietly and climbed the mountain on foot. There was sunlight on the top of the mountain. The light pierced the trees and flowers on the mountain road and fell down, mottled. She walked quietly all the way up. It was quiet in the mountain. But in a large area that was not easy to notice, the grass and treetops were very slightly undulating, like the natural shaking after the wind. Qin Weibai walked up. The wind seemed to be moving up. Therefore, as she moved forward, the whole mountain seemed to be shaking gently. It's really a big deal. Lin Fengting walked beside Qin Weibai and suddenly laughed at himself. He whispered, "It's the first time I've been treated like this since I came to Mount Dibing." Flaming fire followed them in silence. Her body was obviously a little stiff and nervous. Her vigilant eyes swept the gently shaking flowers and trees in the mountain from time to time. The whole mountain was shaking. Of course, it was not because of Qin Weibai's footsteps. It was because of the footsteps of countless people. After summer solstice was attacked on Mount Dibing, the passage and connections of Samsara Palace that could go up the mountain quietly had been completely destroyed by Wang Tianzong. So now the three of them went up the mountain aboveboard. The so-called aboveboard was that every move of the three of them was under the watch of Mount Dibing. When the three of them went up the mountain, the internal security forces stationed in the Wang family of Beihai were also going up the mountain. They were surrounded by the internal security forces all the time. Even more than the internal security forces. At this moment, no one knew how many high-tech and powerful weapons of the Wang family of Beihai were secretly aimed at the three of them. How terrible was Mount Dibing, which had launched a comprehensive defense and was facing a formidable enemy. The Wang family of Beihai had never seen such a big battle in recent decades. Lin Fengting was a little self-deprecating, a little melancholy and a little sad. This was the Wang family of Beihai. Now there were only 3 of them. Flaming Fire was at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. He was an expert in the dark world. Qin Weibai? All the intelligence agencies knew that Qin Weibai knew nothing about martial arts. It was self-evident who Mount Dibing was guarding against. They were guarding against him, the patriarch of the Lin clan. Lin Fengting didn't complain, he just felt a little helpless. Unlike the Jianghu, free and unrestrained. Once one entered the Jianghu, one's actions were beyond one's control. He really had no choice. I'm the one who has dragged you down. Qin Weibai walked slowly along the mountain road, her voice soft. She was dressed very casually. She was wearing black wide-legged pants and very elegant sneakers. Her long hair was tied up, making her look like a graceful young married woman. There was not the slightest sharpness in her, only a very reserved elegance and calmness. It's not a burden. Lin Fengting calmed himself down and shook his head. Let's go up first. He was a friend of the Wang family of Beihai. At least it used to be. So he had the pass of Mount Dibing. It was not difficult for them to go up the mountain. Moreover, the Wang family of Beihai had never been afraid of others going up the mountain, whether they were friends or enemies. The master of Samsara Palace once led the 12 super masters straight into Mount Dibing and escaped unscathed. That was because they quietly appeared in the core area of the top of the mountain, which also meant that the internal security forces of the Wang family of Beihai had hidden dangers. Moreover, Lin Fengting was also there at that time. Qin Weibai had also entered Mount Dibing alone and escaped unscathed. Wang Tianzong didn't kill him, except that deity of the Purgatory of Heaven capital and the master of Samsara Palace might have been around Mount Dibing at that time. The most important thing was that in the general trend, only killing Qin Weibai could hardly change anything. Now the 3 of them appeared above board, which meant that they had to face the entire defense system of Mount Dibing. Lin Fengting was at the peak of the invincible realm. But on Mount Dibing, which had been occupied by the Wang family of Beihai for hundreds of years, could the peak of the invincible realm go against the natural order? Lin Fengting didn't think so at all. You're gambling with your life. Lin Fengting suddenly smiled bitterly. Do you really think that Mount Dibing without Wang Tianzong is not worth being afraid of? You sent someone to attack summer solstice successfully because it happened suddenly. Now Mount Dibing is prepared. If the negotiation fails today, I may barely be able to leave, but I certainly can't take care of you. I never like to gamble. Qin Weibai whispered, I don't like to gamble with my life either. So once I gamble on the table, it is basically when I have absolute confidence. Do you know the trump card of the Wang family of Beihai? Lin Fengting raised his eyebrows. Even he didn't know the trump card of the Wang family of Beihai. I don't know. Qin Weibai shook her head and whispered, but I know their bottom line. So I just need to hold the trump card in my hand. The shadows of the trees on both sides of the road finally faded. The 3 of them officially stepped on the top of Mount Dibing, which had almost no shadow in the sun. The top of the mountain was solemn. Countless armed elites of the internal security forces formed the tightest formation. Their momentum was vast and mighty, as if they were welcoming, but also as if they were guarding against them. Qin Weibai quietly walked through the crowd. The sun shone on her and her whole body seemed to be shining. It was indescribable calmness and calmness. The crowd formed by the internal security forces spread to the center of the mountain. Qin Weibai walked along the crowd to the main hall in the center of the mountain, where all the power of the Wang family of Beihai was concentrated. The door of Emperor Hall was open. A tall young man with a perfect figure stood straight in front of the door. His appearance was gentle and his figure was thin and slender. He stood quietly at the door like a javelin standing upright in front of the door, fierce and sharp. This was a young man who looked thin but could easily give people a sense of power. The first disciple of the Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou State. The combat capability of the invincible realm of the Wang family of Beihai, Dijiang. Dijiang looked at Qin Weibai. His gentle face was full of a sneer, and his eyes were as cold as ice. I want to see summer solstice. Qin Weibai glanced at Dijiang and said in a flat tone. What makes you think you can do that? Dijiang's tone was cold and almost feminine. He really didn't like this woman, and he especially couldn't stand her arrogance, which seemed to overlook all living beings at any time. He couldn't figure out why so many big shots in the dark world fell head over heels for this woman. Now that Samsara Palace and the Wang family of Beihai were hostile, he hated Qin Weibai even more. The master of Samsara Palace was dead. Why were you still so arrogant? The one beside you? Jianghu glanced at Lin Fengting. His eyes were a little complicated and he bowed slightly to Lin Fengting. Lin Fengting nodded expressionlessly, but he felt a little emotional in his heart. Today this young man with the combat capability of the invincible realm would have been taken to the Lin clan by him if he hadn't been accepted as a disciple by Wang Tianzong. I want to see summer solstice. Qin Weibai repeated her words again. What? Are you here to plead for Li Tianlan? Master is now in Huading and no one can save Li Tianlan. Jianghu stood at the door and didn't move. I'm here today not to ask anyone, but I have something in my hand that summer solstice has to see me. I'll only wait for 3 minutes. If summer solstice doesn't come out, I'll leave. Qin Weibai's tone was light, but with a kind of obvious arrogance. Lin Fengting seemed to finally think of something. His face changed slightly and he suddenly waved his hand. A streak of sword energy easily covered the space where he and Qin Weibai were, and everything outside began to blur. Lin Fengting looked at Qin Weibai and said softly, I probably know your trump card. Have you decided? This is the safest way, Qin Weibai said. She thought of Li Tianlan, who was still in Huading, and her eyes were gentle. It's just temporary. Lin Fengting said, if you keep this trump card in your hand it can play a big role in the future. If you use it now, in half a year at most, the Wang family of Beihai will not be the Wang family of Beihai you are familiar with. It doesn't matter. Qin Weibai smiled. After half a year, Tianlan will no longer be the Tianlan that the Wang family of Beihai is familiar with. Or, they will have no chance to be familiar with anything by then. The sword intent began to melt gradually. Everything in Emperor Hall appeared in front of Qin Weibai again. A graceful and gentle beautiful woman in a cheongsam walked out of Emperor Hall. Jianghu, who looked a little cold, bowed slightly to her. It's a pleasure to have friends coming from afar. Summer Solstice stood in front of Emperor Hall, looking at Qin Weibai and Lin Fengting. Her face was a little pale but her smile was impeccable, so elegant, so calm. Li Tianlan quietly watched the video of Wang Tianzong's attack. It was different from the repeated studies of the superpowers. This meant that the video of the strongest combat capability in the dark world, the strongest sword. He only watched it once and then put it away. It was bright outside the window of Huading. Li Tianlan, who had been sleeping since he returned to East Emperor Palace from Dongshan, went downstairs with his mobile phone in his hand, and silently adjusted his state. The final maneuver began at 9 o'clock in the morning. There were less than 3 hours left. He walked out of the gate, stood by the clear lake, looked into the distance and didn't speak for a long time. Tianlan, are you okay? Yu Donglai quietly appeared beside Li Tianlan and handed him a cigarette. What can happen to me? Li Tianlan took the cigarette with a smile, but handed the mobile phone in his hand to Yu Donglai. Yu Donglai took the mobile phone and glanced at it. His pale eyebrows slightly raised. There was a text message on the mobile phone interface, which was extremely simple. I'm fine. My sister is also fine. Samsara Palace has turned from bright to dark. A text message from Little Bai? Yu Donglai chuckled. Yes. Li Tianlan nodded. He saw Qin Weibai's text message before watching the video. Therefore, the thrilling video didn't cause any waves for him. In addition to the pity for the fall of several super masters of Samsara Palace, the most impressive thing in his mind was Wang Tianzong's earth-shattering sword. That was the peak sword intent in the world. That sword was very heavy. Li Tianlan suddenly said. What? Yu Donglai was a little stunned. Nothing. Li Tianlan shook his head. Rushi is still sleeping. I don't want to wait for her. After dinner, I'll go to the Sky Academy to participate in the maneuver. I'll send you there. Yu Donglai said without hesitation. He knew that his face was becoming less and less valuable, but he used to be the backbone of the Li family. Today's maneuver was very important to the Li family. How could he not be there? No need. Li Tianlan shook his head. I can go there by myself. A black Mercedes-Benz with a military plate slowly drove into East Emperor Palace. The Mercedes-Benz stopped in front of Li Tianlan and Yu Donglai, and the door opened. Dongqing Wudi, a giant of Zhongzhou State and the minister of the army headquarters, got out of the car calmly. He looked at Li Tianlan, who was a little surprised, and said with a smile, Where is Rushi? Tianlan, get ready. I'll send you to the Sky Academy in person. Marshal? Li Tianlan called him subconsciously. He knew that Dongqing Wudi would attend today's final maneuver, but he didn't expect that before the maneuver began, he would come to East Emperor Palace and send him there in person. Li Tianlan's mouth moved, but he didn't say anything. Don't think too much. Dongqing Wudi patted Li Tianlan on the shoulder. You just deal with the maneuver. I'll take care of the rest. How can it be so easy to solve? Li Tianlan laughed, but he did not laugh happily. His laughter was not happy but with an obvious resentment. He knew what would happen in today's maneuver. He not only had to face the cooperation of several young chosen ones in Jianghu state. He even had to face the entire Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun city. How could it be so easy to solve? It doesn't matter. Dongqing Wudi said calmly, I'm here today to teach some people what national affairs are. What if some people insist on doing things their own way and ignore the overall situation? Li Tianlan looked at Dongqing Wudi. Then F***K them. Dongqing Wudi suddenly laughed loudly and fiercely. If they don't want the overall situation, then I don't want it either. With his roaring laughter, the sun on the horizon kept rising, and the whole Huading became brighter and brighter. Dongqing Wudi looked at Yu Donglai, whose face gradually relaxed, and said with a chuckle, Senior Yu, I've long known the name of Yu's private home cuisine. After today's maneuver, I'll send Tianlan back. You have to cook a good meal for me. Okay. Yu Donglai laughed and seemed to be completely relaxed. Friends from afar, I'll cook in person today. At the same time, Huading railway station was crowded with people. 4 lengthened trains from different directions of Jianghu state slowly entered the platform of Huading in the roaring whistle. The train departed from Nanyun. The train departed from Beijiang. The train departed from Guangdong. The train departed from Tibet. The 4 lengthened trains, like 4 long dragons, slowly but firmly drove into Huading railway station. The moment the 4 trains stopped, the whole Jianghu state seemed to shake violently. The wind rose and the clouds moved. The storm was coming. Mount Dibing. Emperor Hall. The tea was still warm. Summer Solstice quietly looked at Qin Weibai, who sat opposite her and drank tea quietly. Flaming Fire quietly stood aside. Lin Fengting did not follow in. He asked. At this time he was standing outside Emperor Hall and chatting with Dijiang. Do you know why I asked you to go up the mountain? Summer Solstice suddenly chuckled. Mount Dibing is not afraid of enemies coming up the mountain. But it has never welcomed them. Any threat that may destroy Mount Dibing is not welcome here. I know. Qin Weibai nodded. Because of Lin Fengting. Lin Fengting was at the peak of the invincible realm. But only those who really understood the past friendship and relationship between the Wang family of Beihai and the Lin clan knew. Since Lin Fengting was here, there would be no conflict on Mount Dibing today. Because the people of the Lin clan would not attack the Wang family of Beihai, at least not in the headquarters of the Wang family of Beihai. Summer Solstice coughed softly, picked up the teacup and took a sip. Qin Weibai looked at her pale face. Haven't your injuries stabilized after the last attack? She took the initiative to ask a question that seemed to be rude and provocative. Not bad. Summer Solstice said indifferently, You attacked me, didn't you? Yes. Qin Weibai nodded. What the hell do you want? Summer Solstice blinked and looked at Qin Weibai. Today is the final maneuver of the 2 academies. Qin Weibai said softly, I want Tianlan to live. It has nothing to do with you sending people to attack me. Summer Solstice looked at Qin Weibai's eyes. And can you really control today's situation? So what if you are here? Fengting is outside. Even if he will be persuaded by you to attack me, do you want to control me to threaten Tianzong? Even if I am injured, I am not completely helpless. And even if you are controlled, you will not compromise. Qin Weibai looked at Summer Solstice and whispered, Because some women would rather die than let their men be in trouble. Summer Solstice was silent. The look in her eyes became very fierce. The hostess who controls the Wang family of Beihai in Mount Dibing? I don't have such a stupid idea. I just want to show you something today. Qin Weibai reached out to Flaming Fire. Flaming Fire took out her bag and took out a very thick document from it. Qin Weibai put the document in front of Summer Solstice and whispered, You will be interested. The document was very thick, but the font was large, so there was not a lot of content. Summer Solstice glanced at it casually and suddenly noticed a few sensitive words. Her face suddenly changed and her hand holding the teacup suddenly clenched. Qin Weibai looked at her quietly. Summer Solstice raised her head and stared at Qin Weibai's face. What is this? She asked word by word. A threat. Qin Weibai smiled sweetly. It's obvious. This is a threat to the Wang family of Beihai. Chapter 371. The maneuver of the 2 academies was little known. but it was definitely a big deal for Jianghu State. In the current situation of Jianghu State, not all geniuses could enter the two academies, but most geniuses had the experience of studying in the two academies. As time went on, each batch of graduates from the two academies would slowly grow up and eventually become the backbone of their respective regions and even the special warfare system of Jianghu State. The first batch was Li Guangtu, Gu Xingyun and Wang Tianzong. The second batch was Gu Qianchuan, Dongqing Wudi and Hua Qingfeng. The third batch was Situ Cangyue. Until now, among the graduates of the two academies, living or dead, there would be a very small number of people who would reach the top of the pyramid in Jianghu State, and more people would integrate into the special warfare system and become the cornerstone of Jianghu State. It was no exaggeration to say that any maneuver of the two academies might determine the pattern of the special warfare system of Jianghu State for the next decade or decades. This was especially true for this one. Li Tianlan with the combat capability of the invincible realm. Wang Xingxiao at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. Gu Hanshan who was only half a step away from Wang Xingxiao. Jiang Shangyu who was low-key and tolerant. Two of them had the wind and thunder veins, and one had the heavenly king heart. This could be said to be the most interesting final maneuver in the past 2 decades. It could even be said that whoever could win the first place in this maneuver was most likely to become the first person in Jianghu State for decades. This was also a maneuver that focused all the contradictions in Jianghu State. The Li family supported by the giant group. The Southeast group supported Wang Xingxiao. The Special Warfare group supported Gu Hanshan. The academics and the Prince group were caught in the middle with subtle attitudes. The North group remained neutral. There were too many possibilities for the result of this maneuver, but everyone believed that no matter what the result was, the entire Jianghu State would not be calm after today. Therefore, martial law was imposed in Huading a few days before the maneuver. The black Mercedes-Benz was driving on the road of Huading. The closer it was to the Sky Academy, the more lively the road became. There were no civilians within 2 kilometers of the Sky Academy. Soldiers, policemen and plainclothes and camouflage uniforms could be seen almost everywhere. Through the window, Li Tianlan could almost clearly smell the solemn atmosphere in it. Dongqing Wudi sat on the other side of the back row of the car, silently looking at the scene outside the window with a calm expression. Dongqing Rushi sat in front of Li Tianlan and Dongqing Wudi, blinking her head and blinking her eyes. No one knew what she was thinking. It wasn't like this in previous years. Dongqing Wudi suddenly opened his mouth and said softly, "The scale of martial law at present is basically equivalent to the first level of alert. Even if there were maneuvers in previous years, they would not appear until the last stage. This year's maneuver was supposed to be very exciting, but because of some people's evil intentions, the maneuver has changed." Dongqing Wudi shook his head and continued, "What a strong start but a weak finish." Li Tianlan calmly listened to Dongqing Wudi's evaluation. He knew very well what the other party meant, and the phrase strong start but weak finish was even more vivid. Because Kunlun City directly changed the order of the maneuver. The first day of the maneuver was a team maneuver. What was a team maneuver? It was a maneuver for the teams of the 2 academies to show all their strength to the higher-ups of the 2 academies and Jianghu State after 3 years of training and cooperation. It was a rehearsal for a team to gain a foothold in Jianghu State in the future. In previous final maneuvers, the team maneuver could be said to be the essence and climax of the entire maneuver. But this time, Kunlun City put this part of the finale at the forefront. His goal was self-evident. This was not just about letting several teams unite to target Li Tianlan. It was also about not letting Li Tianlan know his opponents in advance through other maneuver subjects. Gu Xingyun is really considerate. Dongqing Wudi's eyes were a little cold, and there was a touch of undisguised contempt and mockery in his tone. Li Tianlan quietly looked at Dongqing Wudi's face. He could feel the other party's depression and anger, as well as the brutality and killing intent behind all the appearances. Li Tianlan's eyes were a little dazed. He suddenly thought of the mountain in Luojing Zhongyuan. He thought of the ancestral hall and villa on the mountain, the wind and the jungle on the mountain. He thought of Dongqing Hongguang, Dongqing Wudi by Qingqian, Dongqing Qiuqi, Dongqing Rushi and Thunder God. Too many people. Too much kindness. The Dongqing clan seemed to really put everything in front of him. There was no malice, no conspiracy, no calculation, and they didn't even ask for anything in return. Li Tianlan knew what he might face in today's maneuver. Everyone knew it. Dongqing Wudi even knew it better than himself. So he appeared in East Emperor Palace, put on the marshal's uniform that meant power and majesty in Jianghu State, and wore all the medals that Jianghu State had awarded him over the years. Li Tianlan knew that the other party's attitude meant that the Dongqing clan would stand in front of him at all costs to face the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City. At the juncture of his life and death, the Dongqing clan's clear attitude meant that they had no room for retreat. Why? Li Tianlan suddenly asked. He didn't call him marshal, and his expression didn't seem to have the respect and politeness of the past. It was just a little complicated. He had suspected the Dongqing clan's intentions and had been on guard. But now the whole Dongqing clan put everything on him, and even held its heart in front of him with both hands. This kindness and dedication were so strong. Doubt. On guard? Vigilance? Li Tianlan suddenly didn't know what he should doubt. Dongqing Wudi's fingers trembled, and he turned his head and looked into Li Tianlan's eyes quietly. There was a very persistent light in Li Tianlan's eyes. What? The question was simple but too broad. Dongqing Wudi didn't know what to say. He turned his head again and said with a forced smile, "How can there be so many whys? The engagement between you and Rushi is right here. When you get married in the future as your son-in-law, I am your father. We are family. Do you still need to ask why?" Dongqing Rushi's eyes were clear. She reached out and pulled Li Tianlan's palm. Her face was a little red, but there was a touch of joy in her eyes. Just because of the engagement? Li Tianlan held Dongqing Rushi's small hand, but his eyes were fixed on Dongqing Wudi. It's also because of your potential. Dongqing Wudi subconsciously adjusted his sitting posture, took out a cigarette, lit it and took a deep breath. His expression changed and the meaning was hard to understand. Your performance is worth the family's investment. Tianlan, the engagement between you and Rushi was decided by the old master and senior Li when you were born. The family has never thought of breaking this agreement, so for the family you are not an outsider, never. And your excellent performance is worthy of our investment in you. He held the cigarette tightly, and his fingers seemed to tremble because he used too much force. If you don't have the potential and the future to look forward to, you may have a different ending now. Rushi will still marry you. The family will give you a fortune that you can't spend in a lifetime so that you can enjoy life in peace, not like this. Dongqing Wudi's eyes were a little dazed. He looked regretful, gratified, and extremely complicated. If this is the end, the Dongqing clan will slowly transform, gradually give up everything now, and develop its power from the military to the political world. Do you understand? Li Tianlan understood. But he didn't understand. What he understood was the future of the Dongqing clan. Dongqing Wudi had 2 daughters. The eldest daughter, Dongqing Qiuqi, was now one of the directors of Huading, or the path after the transformation of the Dongqing clan. If he had not appeared or his potential was not as expected, the Dongqing clan would fully support Dongqing Qiuqi and make her a key figure in the transformation of the Dongqing clan. In other words, Dongqing Qiuqi represented a path that the Dongqing clan could choose in the future. However, the Dongqing clan did not pin their hopes on Dongqing Rushi. They pinned their hopes on Li Tianlan. Even if I don't appear, there is still Rushi. Li Tianlan whispered, Rushi's potential is not worth investing in? I can't. Dongqing Rushi shook her head honestly. I can't beat Wang Xingxiao and Gu Hanshan. And I can't beat Jiang Shangyu. She grabbed Li Tianlan's hand and felt a little sad. She thought that if she were stronger, would she not have to abstain from the final maneuver? Dongqing Wudi wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. You haven't answered my question. Li Tianlan didn't ask more, but held tightly to his original doubts. His question was about the Dongqing clan's kindness to him without asking for anything in return. Dongqing Wudi said a lot. But Li Tianlan didn't think that was the whole reason. Engagement. Potential. It could only be a part of the reason. Dongqing Wudi smiled bitterly. This time he was silent for a long time. The Sky Academy ahead was already in sight. The Dongqing clan owes you. Tianlan. Dongqing Wudi said slowly, you deserve everything today. Was me? Or owes the Li family? Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes. Dongqing Wudi was silent. Is that all? Li Tianlan continued to ask. Dongqing Wudi slowly turned his head and gazed deeply at Li Tianlan. His eyes were a little intense. It was a kind of intensity that all the emotions were about to rush out of his heart. But in the end, his intensity turned into retreat and even into cowardice. Yes. He said, that's all. Li Tianlan said, oh, and stopped talking. The Mercedes-Benz drove directly into the campus along the temporarily open road of the Sky Academy. Don't think too much. Dongqing Wudi looked at the crowd coming and going outside the window and said in a deep voice, concentrate on the maneuver. Tianlan, I promise you that no one can touch you with me here today. Just go ahead and do it. The Mercedes-Benz slowly stopped in the parking lot temporarily arranged by the Sky Academy. At the same time as the car stopped, another extended black Rolls-Royce drove over from the other direction and stopped next to the Mercedes-Benz. Both sides got out of the car and were stunned at the same time. There were 2 men and 1 woman in both cars. Dongqing Wudi, Li Tianlan, and Dongqing Rushi. The one who got out of the Rolls-Royce was Li Tianlan's biggest opponent today. Wang Xingxiao, who was a little pale, held Song Si's hand and stood behind Wang Tianzong. Dongqing Wudi and Wang Tianzong greeted each other with a smile and shook hands. Wang Xingxiao looked at Li Tianlan and nodded with a smile. He was very friendly. Li Tianlan did not look at Wang Xingxiao. He just looked at Wang Tianzong and said calmly, "Where is Yuetong?" The Sword Emperor of Jianghu State, who was talking to Dongqing Wudi, turned his head and glanced at him. He just glanced at him casually. "You will see her." Wang Tianzong said calmly, "After today?" He spoke very slowly, so the last 4 words were particularly meaningful. Dongqing Wudi's eyes tightened. Li Tianlan's face did not change at all. He believed in Dongqing Wudi's promise just now. But he also believed in Wang Tianzong's strength. Today, if the Sword Emperor of Jianghu State wanted to kill someone, no one in the whole Jianghu State, even the whole dark world, could stop him. The sword edge of the Sword Emperor was enough to tear any solid guarantee. Li Tianlan was neither sad nor happy nor afraid. For the worst result, he had been mentally prepared before Dongqing Wudi appeared in front of him. He might die today. But when he died, the heir of the Wang family of Beihai, Wang Tianzong's most valued son, was bound to go with him. The Li family was stubborn. Chapter 372. Dongqing Wudi didn't seem to hear Wang Tianzong's meaningful words. He kept smiling and moved forward leisurely. Wang Tianzong didn't look at Li Tianlan again. He walked side by side with Dongqing Wudi and chatted casually. One was the Sword Emperor of Jianghu State who influenced the national situation with the power of a clan. The other was the Commander-in-Chief of Jianghu State who had fought for many years and whose influence covered the whole army. They didn't have a deep friendship, but they were not strangers either. When they walked together, they didn't feel embarrassed because they couldn't find a topic. Dongqing Wudi casually mentioned 2 military projects that the Dongqing clan was currently studying. Wang Tianzong said with a smile that he would go back and ask someone to sort out the relevant information. In a few words, the cooperation of the project had been finalized. 2 young couples followed behind them in silence. This strange scene was seen by more and more people, and everyone had a strange look in their eyes. The 2 big shots in Jianghu State were likely to fall out today. The 2 young heavenly sons who were about to win or even die. They were still talking and laughing together when the maneuver was about to begin? Such a scene was really a little strange. The position of the team maneuver was near the 3rd stand of the training ground. The Sky Academy once again set up the exaggeratedly huge screen. All the equipment was connected normally. Before the maneuver personnel entered, the screen was silently playing the internal scene of the maneuver area over and over again. The team maneuver had always been the most important part of the final maneuver, so the maneuver area was very large. It extended from the front of the 3rd stand and entered the edge of the dense forest behind the screen, which was equivalent to officially entering the maneuver area. The terrain of this area with a radius of about 2 kilometers was not complicated, but it was extremely rich, including dense forests, pools, undulating terrain, abandoned teaching buildings and a dilapidated warehouse. When Li Tianlan walked to the 3rd stand, all the elites of the 2 academies who participated in the maneuver today stood in front of the big screen and carefully observed the situation in the maneuver area. Li Tianlan counted and slightly twitched the corner of his mouth. A week ago, when Gu Xingyun held a forum, it was confirmed that there were 12 teams participating in the maneuver. But today there were only 7 in the maneuver site. Among them were East Emperor Palace, Phantom Palace, 3000 World and Jilei Mountain. In other words, after he seriously injured Gu Qianchuan and showed the combat capability of the Invincible Realm, there were only 3 teams from the 2 academies who were willing to advance and retreat with Wang Xingxiao and Gu Hanshan. They were destined to be a loyal force of the other party, and there was no possibility of them changing sides. I saw a few friends. I'm going to take a look. When he was about to walk to the 3rd stand, Wang Tianzong suddenly smiled. Wudi, see you later. See you later. Dongqing Wudi nodded calmly. The moment the 6 people were about to go their separate ways, Wang Xingxiao, who had been silent, suddenly reached out to Li Tianlan. You are very strong. He looked into Li Tianlan's eyes and said, I'm probably not your match right now. But in today's maneuver we still have a chance of winning. Be careful. Wang Tianzong paused. He did not turn around or speak. Li Tianlan looked into Wang Xingxiao's eyes. His eyes were very calm and even had a trace of regret. Li Tianlan suddenly laughed. He didn't feel bad for Wang Tianzong, but he didn't like him either. But somehow he appreciated the next patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai. Perhaps it was because of the other party's frankness. Li Tianlan reached out and held Wang Xingxiao's hand. Wang Xingxiao's palms slightly tightened and he said calmly, I'm sorry for not being able to have a fair fight with you. I'm sorry for you and myself. But how can everything go well in Jianghu? From where I stand, I owe you an apology. From the standpoint of the Wang family of Beihai, I will do whatever it takes. He let go of his hand. You won't win today. Next year I'll toast you a glass of good wine. He took Song Ci and turned around without looking back. See you in the maneuver. Wang Tianzong moved forward in silence. Wang Xingxiao and Song Ci followed in silence. If it weren't for the fact that our positions are destined to be hostile, he should be the kind of person you admire the most, right? Wang Tianzong suddenly broke the silence and said slowly, if his surname wasn't Li, wouldn't he be the kind of person you admire the most? Wang Xingxiao smiled. What a pity. Wang Tianzong said. Yes. Wang Xingxiao nodded. What a pity. The backs of the three people were getting farther and farther in Li Tianlan's sight. Li Tianlan calmly withdrew his gaze and looked at Dongqing Wudi. Dongqing Wudi stared blankly at Wang Tianzong's back without saying a word. He and Wang Tianzong talked a lot, but it seemed that they talked about nothing. From beginning to end, he never mentioned today's final maneuver. Wang Tianzong didn't mention it either. Obviously, Sword Emperor had made up his mind. When he, the giant of Jianghu State and the #1 person in the army headquarters, personally brought Li Tianlan to the maneuver site, Wang Tianzong still didn't intend to give him, the minister, any face. Since he had made up his mind, it was useless to say anything. Tianlan, don't be careless. Dongqing Wudi said slowly, Wang Xingxiao is not talking big. Li Tianlan certainly knew the truth of Wang Xingxiao's words. The combat capability of the invincible realm was not really invincible. Even if it was the real invincible realm, few people dared to say that they were really invincible. Wang Xingxiao, Gu Hanshan and Jiang Shangyu, any one of them alone would not be his opponent. But today it was a team fight. Three geniuses with combat capability far beyond their realm joined forces, which might not be worse than the combat capability of the invincible realm. If this maneuver was really a maneuver that would be lost, Wang Xingxiao and Gu Hanshan would have given up long ago. I understand. Li Tianlan nodded. The little guy from the Wang family of Beihai is not bad. Dongqing Wudi smiled. I don't mean his apology to you. I mean standing in his position he can admit that he is not as good as you. With this kind of mind he is much better than the little bastard of Kunlun City. Tianlan, I appreciate him, but in this maneuver the enemy is clear. Don't hold back. How come? Li Tianlan smiled. He knew better than Dongqing Wudi what this maneuver meant for himself and the Li family. They won. From now on the Li family would usher in a real opportunity to rise. If they lost, even if the Li family was not doomed, the situation would be extremely bad. This maneuver was key for Jianghu State and also for the Li family. Otherwise, Li Tianlan would not have participated in this maneuver with the intention of destroying indiscriminately, knowing that he was likely to face the entire Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City. If his surname is not Wang, maybe you will be good friends. Dongqing Rushi took Li Tianlan's hand and whispered, just like Lin Fengting, Li Baidian and others. Li Tianlan reached out and touched Dongqing Rushi's long hair, saying softly, how can there be so many ifs? The three of them walked to the number 3 stand of the training ground under everyone's gaze. The stand was already full of people. People from all walks of Jianghu State who were qualified to appear here had already appeared. Li Tianlan saw several familiar faces, and they were all sitting very close to the front. There were enemies and friends. Zhuang Huayang, the principal of the Sky Academy. Zhong Yue, the top leader of Huading. Yi Fengqing, the director of Huading Special Operations Bureau. Zhang Qi, the director of the Southeast Special Warfare Headquarters. Lu Shiyuan, the director of the Curtain Intelligence Department of Huading, the boss of the Blue Sky Group. Han Donglu, the chairman of the board of directors of Xingshi Group, and Han Xinyan. Zhang Holong, whom he had seen several times, sat between an elegant couple, smiling and waving at him. Lu Shuanghua, the intelligence organization of the Wang family of Beihai, sat quietly. Wang Zhaoyang, the commander of the Shadow Sting Force, the largest special forces in Jianghu State, looked serious. Li Tianlan also accidentally saw Wu Jingmin, the new deputy prime minister of Jianghu State, who represented the cabinet to attend the final maneuver. Gu Xingyun, who was a little pale, sat in the center and looked at Li Tianlan with indifferent eyes. Political bigwigs, military strongmen, intelligence elites, patriarchs of wealthy families, and giants of special warfare. They gathered here. Li Tianlan also saw more people he did not know. Everyone came here with their own plans and purposes. Wu Jingmin came here on behalf of the Jianghu state government. The principle of the Jianghu state party commanding the gun had not changed for hundreds of years. The gun naturally represented the army headquarters. Therefore, after the formal formation of the special warfare system, this system, which could be on the same level as the army headquarters but was more secretive, was directly responsible to the government. Wu Jingmin's appearance here meant that the government was always paying attention to the changes of the special warfare system of Jianghu state. The presence of military generals here was not very welcome. These strong men, who were destined to fight for talents with the special warfare system, did not seem to care much about the eyes of their colleagues in the special warfare system. The patriarchs of wealthy families came here for investment. Every team participating in today's maneuver was likely to become a behemoth that could control the situation of Jianghu state in the next 10 or even decades. A correct investment could often become the key to making one's family more prosperous many years later. Therefore, after the maneuver, these wealthy families would be the most active in contacting with the major teams. The intelligence elites sat here for a relatively simple purpose. In addition to finding out the talents they needed, the maneuver they watched was a kind of intelligence in itself. The special warfare system was a force that had to participate. Because the maneuver of the two academies was an internal affair of the special warfare system, Gu Xingyun, the god of war of Jianghu state, had to come even if he did not want to. When Dongqing Wudi walked up to the stands, everyone in the stands stood up to greet him. After all, in any case, Dongqing Wudi was the highest-ranking tycoon who attended the maneuver. He was the minister of the army headquarters and the actual leader of nearly 5 million troops in Jianghu state. Although he ranked third among the 9 tycoons in Jianghu state, when the international situation was tense, the strength and power of this position were even above that of the prime minister. This was the real power to the extreme, and people could not help but respect and even awe him. Dongqing Wudi shook hands with everyone one by one and introduced Li Tianlan to everyone at the same time. Everyone could feel Dongqing Wudi's seriousness and solemnity. So everyone looked at Li Tianlan with more and more complicated eyes. It was a kind of forcibly changed kindness, softness, and emotion. They all knew what would happen in today's final maneuver. If Li Tianlan could not defeat the joint forces of several heavenly sons, he was bound to be killed in the maneuver area. But if he won, he was very likely to face the sword of Sword Emperor and the killing intent of Kunlun City. No one was optimistic about Li Tianlan. He was a heavenly son. He was the most amazing genius in Jianghu state in recent decades. Despite his outstanding aptitude, he did not have a terrifying enough background. The Li family had made a comeback. But the Li family's current strength was still weak. Everyone thought that Li Tianlan would definitely die today. Especially after learning that Dongqing Rushi also gave up participating in the maneuver. But now Dongqing Wudi directly overturned everyone's inner speculation. He took Li Tianlan to the stands and seriously introduced the heavenly son of the Li family to everyone. His intention and formality could clearly make everyone feel his firmness and determination. Combined with Zhou Yuanshan's transfer to Jianghu some time ago, everyone knew that the Dongqing clan had completely regarded Li Tianlan as the core figure in their future development. Zhou Yuanshan, Dongqing Qiuqi, and Dongqing Rushi were all operating around Li Tianlan. In the next few decades of development, the Dongqing clan had clearly regarded Li Tianlan as their new core. The Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City wanted to kill Li Tianlan. The military giants protected Li Tianlan to the death. No matter what the result was, at least Li Tianlan was no longer a heavenly son with only talent but no background. The Dongqing clan might be a little worse than Kunlun City and the Wang family of Beihai. But Li Tianlan was definitely stronger than Wang Xingxiao and Gu Hanshan. So complementary. Dongqing Wudi finally walked to Gu Xingyun. His Highness the God of War of Jianghu State was pale, but at this time there was a strange cyan color on his face, as if he was trying to suppress his anger. He saw Dongqing Wudi introducing Li Tianlan to everyone meticulously. This was not the so-called useless effort. This was completely putting pressure on the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City. The Dongqing clan had been vaguely supporting Li Tianlan before, but now they stood up completely and completely protected Li Tianlan under their wings. Killing Li Tianlan was bound to make a deadly feud with the Dongqing clan. It didn't matter what Li Tianlan's surname was. What mattered was that he would become the core of the next generation of the Dongqing clan. Just like Gu Hanshan's status in Kunlun City and Wang Xingxiao's status in the Wang family of Beihai. If they killed Li Tianlan at this time, it was not surprising that the Dongqing clan would react. Gu Xingyun kept breathing deeply. His injury was far from recovering, and his chest was full of pain when he breathed. He silently gritted his teeth and looked at Dongqing Wudi in front of him. He was sitting. Dongqing Wudi was standing. So Gu Xingyun had to look up. The sunlight after the rain shone down from the sky and fell on Dongqing Wudi. His body was covered with medals issued by Jianghu state, symbolizing all the honor and courage of a soldier. The medals were shining in the sun, a little dazzling. Gu Xingyun narrowed his eyes, held Dongqing Wudi's outstretched hand and said calmly, "Marshal, you are really different today." Indeed. Dongqing Wudi let go of his hand and sat casually beside Gu Xingyun. "I'm a little strange to myself, not to mention others. I even forget the origins of many medals. I'm like this. I'm afraid others have long forgotten, right?" Gu Xingyun slowly withdrew his palm, gently clenched it into a fist and said with a smile, "How could it be? Jianghu state will definitely remember the achievements of Jianghu state. You are a hero and Jianghu state can't forget it. I dare not forget it." "Hero?" Dongqing Wudi shook his head with a smile and handed Gu Xingyun a cigarette. "I don't like to be a hero. It seems that heroes are good-tempered and can tolerate some clowns jumping around in front of them. I have a bad temper and I think everyone knows that. But it turns out that even if some people don't forget my contributions, they forget my temper." Dongqing Wudi looked at Gu Xingyun with soft eyes. "Xingyun, do you think I've killed too few people?" His voice was very light. But his voice was like a line of soldiers piercing the midsummer sun, making all the people nearby who heard this subconsciously shiver. Jianghu state's god of massacre. How could he kill too few people? Gu Xingyun's body stiffened for a moment, and then he calmly said, "Marshal, you must be joking." Dongqing Wudi chuckled and quietly changed the subject. "How's your injury? You were attacked these days and Jianghu state is very lively. I approved several documents about finding the murderer in the army headquarters. How about it? Do you have any clues about the murderer now?" Gu Xingyun's elegant and pale face did not change at all, but a cold light flashed in his eyes. He stared straight at Li Tianlan in front of him and said expressionlessly, "There are no clues for the time being. But I believe that no matter who the murderer is, he won't live long." At this moment, Gu Xingyun thought of the scene when Dongqing Wudi introduced Li Tianlan to everyone just now. Such a move was to put pressure on Kunlun City and the Wang family of Beihai. But wasn't this a kind of provocation? The Wang family of Beihai never retreated in the face of provocation. Was Kunlun City going to retreat? What? Today he was not the only one who came to the Sky Academy. There was also Li Shi hiding in the dark. Gu Xingyun straightened up, looked at Dongqing Wudi's eyes and said blandly, "I guess he won't live past today." "Really?" Dongqing Wudi looked at Gu Xingyun's eyes for a long time, and then he asked lightly. Without waiting for Gu Xingyun's answer, he nodded directly to Li Tianlan and said gently, "Tianlan, you go first. Just focus on the maneuver and leave other things to me." Li Tianlan nodded and turned around gently. He seemed to be still in the same place when he turned around. But the next second, his whole body had appeared in front of the big screen under the high platform. Like a ghost. The clear afterimage dissipated in a scream. Gu Xingyun's face twitched again. Dongqing Wudi stopped talking and just quietly looked at the screen under the platform. By introducing Li Tianlan to everyone, he had shown his final attitude. This was also the last fight. Until now, Dongqing Wudi still hoped that this matter could end in the rules of balance and compromise. This was more in line with the overall situation of Jianghu state. He did what he could. But he didn't know whether the Wang family of Beihai could see the so-called overall situation. Kunlun City could see the overall situation, but it didn't want to care. Li Tianlan, who had grown up, almost made it lose its mind with fear. As for Wang Tianzong, he didn't want to see the so-called overall situation at all. Sword Emperor of Jianghu state slowly walked up to the high platform before the maneuver began and sat next to Gu Xingyun in the greetings along the way. Dongqing Wudi, Gu Xingyun and Wang Tianzong. The three giants all looked calm but determined. Dongqing Wudi suddenly laughed at himself. He seemed to relax and slowly leaned against the chair behind him. Chapter 373. This is the second update. There was one update a minute ago. Don't miss it. 9 o'clock. The maneuver officially began. Zhuang Huayang, president of the Sky Academy, and Qin Songlin, president of the Deep Sea Academy, made the opening remarks of the maneuver on behalf of the two academies. Zhuang Huayang, dressed in a suit, held a microphone in his hand, smiled peacefully, but his eyes were full of worry. He looked at Dongqing Wudi, took a deep breath and said slowly, "Everyone, first of all, let's welcome." Boom! The opening remarks of the maneuver were completely interrupted after just a few words. A deafening roar rang out without any warning, shaking the heavens and earth. A cannonball burning with black smoke and dragging waves of fire rose into the air in everyone's astonished gaze, and finally smashed into a teaching building of the Sky Academy. The seemingly old but extremely strong teaching building shook violently under the bombardment of the cannonball. Countless glasses were broken into pieces, and the whole building collapsed with smoke and dust in the loud bang. Dust flew everywhere. This shot was enough to explain one thing. The cannonball that smashed the whole teaching building was a real one. If this sudden shot fell on the stands, the consequences would be unimaginable. Countless people turned their heads subconsciously and looked around. What the hell is going on? Yi Fengqing, the director of Huading Special Operations Bureau, who was sitting behind Dongqing Wudi, suddenly stood up. In his sight, an endless long line suddenly appeared on all the roads of the Sky Academy. The army in camouflage seemed to be pouring into the Sky Academy endlessly. Silence. They marched firmly toward the training ground of the Sky Academy. Yi Fengqing was dazzled in front of him. He could not determine how many people there were in this army for a moment. 10,000? 20,000? Or 30,000? The dense army occupied every corner of the Sky Academy. Yi Fengqing suddenly rose into the air, stood on a high place and looked out of the Sky Academy. Boom! Another violent rumble rang out. The cannonball burning with black smoke once again smashed into the Sky Academy. This time it fell near the training ground. The crowd was in a complete uproar. Yi Fengqing, standing on a high place, also saw the other side of the river. In his sight, countless armored vehicles and tanks were neatly arranged by the river, and countless barrels were aimed at the Sky Academy. On the other side of the river, there were still soldiers getting out of the car and rushing into the Sky Academy along the bridge and road. Yi Fengqing's heart sank. He was known as a madman, but at this moment his whole body was ice cold. Countless soldiers began to rush into the training ground. Everyone was armed to the teeth and armed with live ammunition. More and more soldiers rushed into the training ground. A row, a patch, a square formation. The square formation slowly moved forward, growing larger and larger. However, the formation was not chaotic at all. It was strict and orderly. Gu Xingyun looked at this scene in a daze. At this moment, because of his injuries, he could be said to be in the weakest state of his life. Weakness could naturally affect his mental state. At this moment, as he looked at the increasingly large phalanx of troops, he stood rooted to the ground, unable to speak for a long time. The Sky Academy finally reacted. The big screen that was playing the maneuver area switched directly to the scene of the entire Sky Academy. In an instant, everyone saw the scene inside and outside the Sky Academy. The army. Weapons. Other than the army, there were only weapons. More and more armored vehicles and tanks lined up along the river. Some soldiers even set up rocket launchers nearby. More and more soldiers seemed to have no end at all. They rushed into the Sky Academy like a raging tide and a big wave. A large number of people began to gather at the training ground. A small number of elites occupied the arsenal of the Sky Academy for the first time. The people who guarded the arsenal were naturally experts. But in the face of such a large number of Zhongzhou state troops, they could not react at all. When they were hesitating whether to take action, they were directly overwhelmed by the rushing army. The arsenal was completely lost. So more main battle tanks and armored vehicles rushed out of the arsenal than on the other side of the river and rampaged through the entire Sky Academy. There was a buzzing sound in the base of the Sky Academy. Armed helicopters appeared at a low altitude and flew slowly. More advanced fighter jets rushed into the sky and rotated at a high altitude. Some professionals entered the missile center. In less than 10 minutes, the control of the launchable missiles in the Sky Academy had fallen into their hands. Boom! The third cannon sounded in the Sky Academy. The shell passed through the training ground of the Sky Academy and fell straight into the villa in the center of the academy. That was where Zhuang Huayang lived and worked. The whole villa exploded in an instant. In a mess, stones were flying everywhere, and the surrounding flowers and running water were completely gone. Zhuang Huayang did not panic or get angry. He held the microphone, and there was only amazement and a bitter smile on his face. But except for him, most of the people present were in a great panic and dignified state. This is the latest armor-piercing shell developed by the Dongqing clan. It has just served in Jianghu state for less than 3 months and is given priority to the Border Praetorian Corps. Its code name is Wolf Smoke. Its explosive power is about 5 times that of ordinary shells, and the explosion range is about 3 times that of ordinary shells. With less than 200 Wolf Smoke shells, artillery fire can easily cover the entire Sky Academy. Tianzong, what do you think? In the panic, Dongqing Wudi's voice sounded unhurriedly. He was not asking Gu Xingyun. He was asking Wang Tianzong. In an instant, Wang Tianzong did not respond, but everyone who heard this sentence nearby looked at Dongqing Wudi in disbelief. Countless troops gathered under the stage, almost filling the entire training ground. As far as the eye could see, there was a dense army with no end in sight. Dongqing Wudi looked at Wang Tianzong quietly. Wang Tianzong's expression was still calm. He just nodded and said, "It's okay. I think it's okay too." Dongqing Wudi smiled and stood up directly in the front row. At the front of the square formation under the stage stood 4 fierce generals. The moment Dongqing Wudi stood up, the 4 stood at attention and saluted at the same time. Their eyes were so fanatical. Their voices were hoarse. Li Zhonghu of the Blood Battalion of the Border Control Corps pays respect to the Marshal. Sun Minggran of the Pegasus Battalion of the Border Control Corps pays respect to the Marshal. Wu Junyu of the Black Dragon King of the Border Control Corps pays respect to the Marshal. Guan Jingjia of the Wild Sand Battalion of the Border Control Corps pays respect to the Marshal. Their voices were high and loud as if they were roaring from the depths of their souls. Almost everyone present had heard of their names. They might not be as famous as the 4 famous generals under Dongqing Wudi's command, but in their respective legions, they were well-deserved backbone generals. Dongqing Wudi looked at them silently. He took a deep breath and raised his hand to salute. In an instant, thousands or tens of thousands of troops under the stage raised their hands to salute at the same time. This was an indescribable power. Tens of thousands of people raised their hands at the same time, and there seemed to be a storm in the whole training ground. The air was oppressive and suffocating. Only tens of thousands of soldiers raised their hands and looked at their marshal with fanatical faces. Dongqing Wudi? Gu Xingyun finally reacted. His face turned red and even a little purple in an instant. No matter what all this meant today, Dongqing Wudi mobilized troops into the Sky Academy and destroyed the maneuver of the special warfare system, which was tantamount to slapping Gu Xingyun in the face. His face was completely distorted in an instant. He struggled to stand up and pointed at Dongqing Wudi. "What do you want to do? Mobilizing the elites of the Border Control Corps without permission? Are you crazy? Do you know what you're doing?" "I don't know." Dongqing Wudi slowly turned around, and his eyes were full of mockery. "But I know what I want to do." He stood on the stage with a calm expression, but his voice shook the sky and echoed over the whole training ground. "I don't care what bullshit rules you have. Today I'm here and my army is here. I don't want to hurt anyone, but I don't want anyone to hurt the people I care about. The maneuver can continue, but Tianlan must be alive. Today I'll make it clear that whoever dares to hurt Tianlan, I'll dare to kill him." His eyes swept over Gu Xingyun, Wang Tianzong, and even Gu Hanshan and Wang Xingxiao under the stage. Gu Xingyun trembled in anger. You want to commit treason. Bastard. You want to commit treason with the Border Control Corps?" He suddenly looked at the square formation under the stage and said angrily, "Are you going to betray Jianghu state with this madman?" "Betray Jianghu state?" Dongqing Wudi's voice suddenly rose. He suddenly reached out and pulled his clothes, and all the metals flew directly into the sky. He reached out and pointed. The sword intent surged, and a metal suddenly lit up in the dim blue electric light. The national metal. More than 20 years ago, the Li family changed dramatically. Heng State and Annan State joined forces to invade Jianghu State. Li Guangtu died, and the 120,000 troops of the Border Control Corps were almost wiped out. In that battle, I took 6,000 people of the Border Control Corps to kill 10,000 Supermaster Army of Annan State and 3 large mercenary groups. My 6,000 people. I had over 20 wounds on my body in exchange for this medal. He pointed his palm again and another medal lit up. 19 years ago, an important person in Jianghu state who had a close relationship with Kunlun city committed treason and fled to Heng state. I personally led the team and went 800 miles into Heng state and finally completed the beheading task. In that battle, more than 1,500 people of the Thunderbolt Battalion died. I was in a coma for 3 months in exchange for this medal of courage. 15 years ago, Night Spirit invaded Jianghu state. I personally took my brothers and dragged Sky Spirit, an invincible realm expert of Night Spirit, to a small town in Nanyun. In the end, I got killed by the human emperor. In that battle, 800 people of the Border Control Corps became martyrs and became this medal of blood. 10 years ago, the rout of Rant's team lurking back to Jianghu state from Snow Country was exposed. The Black Dragon Army lost 2 divisions overnight and successfully supported Rant's team to return home. In that battle, the former commander of the Black Dragon Army, my brother Lin Yuatong, sacrificed himself to cover me. His body has not been found yet, so I got this Medal of Fortitude. 3 years ago, the 5 superpowers joined forces with Annan State to invade the border. More than half of the Thunderbolt Battalion was lost, and the Blood Battalion lost more than 8,000 people. The Border Control Corps collectively made first-class meritorious service, and the President personally awarded me the Red Star Medal. Dongqing Wudi's voice kept rising, echoing on the training ground like thunder. Every one of my 22 medals was exchanged with the lives of the Border Control Corps. I've been in charge of the Border Control Corps for more than 20 years, participated in 36 wars, and killed more than 100,000 enemies. What did I get in exchange for that? In exchange for hundreds of scars on my body, the sacrifice of tens of thousands of my soldiers, and these more than 20 medals. This is what the Border Control Corps and I have done for Jianghu State. Treason? Gu Xingyun, I and my soldiers are standing here now. Do you dare to face these medals and say that the Border Control Corps is going to commit treason? Gu Xingyun's lips trembled violently, and his face was livid. Kill. Tens of thousands of troops in the phalanx raised their guns at the same time and roared. Enough. Wang Qianzong, who had been silent, suddenly whispered. Dongqing Wudi narrowed his eyes and looked at Wang Qianzong, who still looked indifferent. How many people? Wang Qianzong suddenly asked. Not many. Dongqing Wudi said calmly, 40,000 people. Not many indeed. Wang Qianzong nodded. If I want to kill him, 40,000 people can't stop me. You can try. Dongqing Wudi sneered. 40,000 elites in the Qi-controlling realm. Most of them may have no hope of breaking through the ice-condensing realm in their lives, but you are the Sword Emperor. Can you really break the domain formed by 40,000 people at the same time? Are you forcing me to take action? Wang Qianzong looked at Dongqing Wudi. I'm just teaching you what the overall situation is. If you dare to move today, 40,000 people can appear here. In 3 days, 400,000 troops can appear in Mount Dibing. Even if I can't defeat your Beihai Corps, can't I destroy your nest? 40,000 people can't stop you, but if you move today, the Dongqing clan will fight you to the end at all costs. Dongqing Wudi's eyes were calm and crazy. He looked at Wang Qianzong and said word by word, even if my family is ruined. You're not afraid, so are they? Wang Qianzong's body seemed to shake and then he sneered. Dongqing Wudi suddenly laughed wildly. He pointed to the 40,000 troops below the platform and laughed wildly. I believe in the strength of your Sword Emperor. But the 40,000 people here are all excellent soldiers who have risked their lives for Jianghu State. They stand here today. Even if they don't move, Wang Qianzong, you can kill them all, but how many do you dare to kill? The Sword Emperor drew his sword and slaughtered the soldiers of Jianghu State. He might still be the Sword Emperor, but he could never be the Sword Emperor of Jianghu State again. Wang Qianzong narrowed his eyes tightly and remained silent. Dongqing Wudi didn't wait for others to test his determination. He suddenly turned around, looked at the platform below and said in a loud voice, I'm Dongqing Wudi, your marshal, but what I say now is not an order. Now, I need someone to stand here and die for me. Who dares to die in the Border Control Corps? The silence lasted only a few seconds. The next moment, 40,000 people raised their guns without hesitation and aimed at Wang Qianzong. Their eyes were fixed on Dongqing Wudi, the invincible marshal in their hearts. It was a kind of almost irrational fanaticism and madness. I'm willing to die for the marshal. The uniform roar went straight to the sky and the wind and clouds changed color. At this moment, in the face of the killing intent and will of 40,000 people, Even the Sword Emperor of Jianghu State seemed to have no momentum at all. Gu Xingyun slowly slumped into his chair. His face was livid. He gritted his teeth and said, "Dongqing Wudi, you broke the rules. You must pay the price." Bah! Dongqing Wudi spat at Gu Xingyun and said with a grim smile, "Fuck you." Chapter 374. Everyone knew that this final maneuver would not end peacefully. However, no one could have imagined that the scene would be so explosive. He was willing to die for the marshal. This was not a slogan. This was the soul of the entire Border Praetorian Corps. No one would doubt their determination. As long as Wang Tianzong dared to draw his sword, 40,000 people, 40,000 of the most elite troops of the Border Control Corps, would definitely charge at the so-called Sword Emperor of Jianghu State without hesitation until all of them died in battle. The standing minister of the army headquarters of Jianghu State. The governor of Kunlun City. The patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai. It was the first time that the three giants who could be said to be standing at the peak of Jianghu State put their conflicts in front of everyone so fiercely. The three of them seemed to have no way out. But once they took another step forward, they would truly fight to the death. No one was willing to bear the consequences. Wang Tianzong looked at Dongqing Wudi quietly. Dongqing Wudi looked at Gu Xingyun with a ferocious smile. Gu Xingyun looked at Wang Tianzong with a livid face. The situation was subtle and deadlocked. The others sat in their seats with cold bodies, not even daring to breathe. No room for negotiation? After a long time, Wang Tianzong took the initiative to break the silence. "What do you think?" Dongqing Wudi glanced at him. His expression had already become calm, but his eyes still flickered with an extraordinary divine light. As the standing minister of the army headquarters of Jianghu State, he naturally had the power to transfer troops. But he transferred 40,000 of the most elite soldiers from the four armies of the Border Control Corps to Huading and directly surrounded the Sky Academy. While declaring force, Dongqing Wudi also mercilessly trampled on the rules. No matter what the result was, Dongqing Wudi had to pay the price afterward. He had taken a huge risk to get to this point. What other choice did he have? Wang Tianzong's eyes swept over Dongqing Wudi and fell on the endless 40,000 troops under the platform. The army stood motionless in absolute silence. Wang Tianzong looked at them one by one. From their eyes, he saw only unshakable toughness and persistence. A soldier should be like that. Such was the spirit of a soldier. The Border Control Corps was known as the most elite large corps in Jianghu State. And these 40,000 people could be said to be the most elite in the entire Border Control Corps. 40,000 soldiers, the weakest of whom were in the Qi-controlling realm. Dongqing Wudi was right. Wang Tianzong was invincible in the world and ranked first on the divine list. He could kill 40,000 people. Could be killed. But he didn't dare to kill them. Sword Emperor's sword was aimed at the most elite warriors of Jianghu State. Even if he only killed one person under the watchful eyes of the public, it was treason. Absolute martial strength, deep foundation, and super strength could represent many things. But it couldn't really replace everything. Even Wang Tianzong had to abide by the rules. If he made a mistake, he had to pay the price. If he pulled out his sword today, Li Tianlan would definitely die. But in the face of the counterattack of the entire 40,000 troops, Wang Tianzong could not leave Huading unscathed without killing a single person, even if he was an immortal. If it really came to that, the Dongqing clan, which had already announced in front of everyone, would have no way out. While announcing the Wang family of Beihai's treason, the Dongqing clan was bound to mobilize all its troops to fight the Wang family of Beihai to the death. The Border Control Corps faced the Beihai Corps. The internal strife in Jianghu State and the civil strife in Eastern Europe would take the opportunity to cover Jianghu State, and the overall situation would collapse. At that time, the Dongqing clan would be ruined, which was the price the Dongqing clan had to pay regardless of the overall situation. But at that time, even if the Dongqing clan was destroyed, the Wang family of Beihai would not be much better. The Wang family of Beihai might become the next Li family, even more tragic than the Li family in those days. Wang Tianzong had a headache. At this moment he finally found that Li Tianlan had become one of the most sensitive figures in Jianghu State. He affected the Dongqing clan. But the Dongqing clan could affect the general trend. Dongqing Wudi's strength was insignificant in Wang Tianzong's eyes. With his aptitude, it was not difficult for him to enter the invincible realm. But as he just said, over the years, countless wars and countless serious injuries had already worn out Dongqing Wudi's potential. The potential that was enough for him to enter the invincible realm had turned into more than 20 medals. Now Dongqing Wudi was in the half-step invincible realm. With Wang Tianzong's strength he could kill him with one sword stroke. The problem was that Dongqing Wudi's strength was insignificant, but his identity made even Wang Tianzong feel pressure when facing him. He was one of the 9 directors of the Zhongzhou Decision-Making Committee, ranked 3rd, and the standing minister of the army headquarters. He was the actual supreme leader of millions of troops in Zhongzhou state, including the Navy, Army and Air Force, plus the Special Forces. If it was during the war, Dongqing Wudi's power could be said to be second only to the president. He was the real number 2 figure in Zhongzhou state. Even in peacetime, his status was second only to the president and the prime minister. Kill him with one sword stroke? No matter how crazy Wang Tianzong was, he would not have such an idea. Wang Tianzong narrowed his eyes and glanced at Gu Xingyun calmly. He had already begun to calculate the consequences of the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City joining hands to make all the contradictions break out. If the 2 families really joined hands, it was not difficult to suppress the rebound of the Dongqing clan with absolute strength. Even if he killed Li Tianlan today and even fought his way out of the siege of 40,000 troops, the risk of the collapse of the Wang family of Beihai had been minimized with the support of the Special Warfare Group and the Southeast Group. If the 2 sides could really trust each other and join hands, the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City would definitely take out a lot of bargaining chips to calm the anger of the whole Zhongzhou state. The Southeast Group and the Special Warfare Group would be badly hurt. Some of the core technologies of the Wang family of Beihai would even be forced to open up. Even the control of the Beihai core would be given up by Wang Tianzong. As the Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou state, he was likely to face more than a few years in prison. All this might be exchanged for the complete destruction of the Dongqing clan and the complete disappearance of the Li family. Was it worth it or not? Wang Tianzong looked at Gu Xingyun, trying to find a tacit understanding with him. Dongqing Wudi was also looking at Gu Xingyun. His look was flat and indifferent. He could think of what Wang Tianzong thought of. However, Wang Tianzong faced a huge temptation. He imperceptibly lowered the risk that the Wang family of Beihai would completely collapse after the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City joined hands. But no matter how low the risk was, it still existed. Dongqing Wudi had no way out. He was going to protect Li Tianlan today. If Wang Tianzong really dared to take action, no matter who he cooperated with, Dongqing Wudi would make him regret it for the rest of his life. Marshal Dongqing is too sensitive. Today is a normal maneuver. It's a competition between young trainees. Win or lose, life or death, and it's up to fate. I agree with you. No one outside the maneuver can interfere with the result of the maneuver. In an embarrassing silence, Gu Xingyun gritted his teeth, his face was livid, and he expressed his attitude word by word. No one spoke. But everyone who heard his statement was shocked inside. What he said couldn't be more obvious. Kunlun City had given up the plan against Li Tianlan. At least it gave up the plan against Li Tianlan in this maneuver. No matter what the result of the maneuver was, Li Tianlan would no longer face the pressure of Kunlun City. That's the best. Dongqing Wudi said indifferently. Wang Tianzong's eyes returned to calmness. Gu Xingyun kept taking deep breaths and clenching his fists. His body seemed to be trembling imperceptibly. Didn't he know that the Special Warfare Group and the Southeast Group had a great chance of winning? But he really couldn't afford such a big gamble. The strength of the Special Warfare Group was not weak. But Gu Xingyun was not as good as Wang Tianzong. A Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou state who was still at his peak might be able to break out of the encirclement after killing Li Tianlan. But once Li Tianlan died, a seriously injured god of war of Zhongzhou state would surely die without a whole body. Gu Xingyun had to give up the plan. He didn't want to let Li Tianlan go. But he didn't want to die either. Headmaster, what do you think? Wang Tianzong was silent for a while and suddenly glanced at Zhuang Huayang. I agree with His Highness Gu Xingyun. Zhuang Huayang smiled and said, the final maneuver is a normal competition. Anyone outside the maneuver who tries to interfere with the result of the maneuver is equivalent to destroying the future situation of the special warfare system of Zhongzhou state. His attitude was clear. But it was just a clear attitude from the position of the headmaster of the Sky Academy. But everyone knew what Wang Tianzong was asking. Zhuang Huayang was one of the big shots of the academics. President Li Huaqing of Zhongzhou state was the current leader of the academics. Dongqing Wudi transferred troops into the Sky Academy without permission. President Li Huaqing was the most powerful figure who had the most reason to hold Dongqing Wudi accountable. Wang Tianzong looked at Zhuang Huayang. Zhuang Huayang smiled faintly and kept his composure. The attitude of the academics was subtle, but it was obvious that they didn't want to give up the relationship with Li Tianlan. They wanted to keep Li Tianlan, but they didn't want to take too much risk. Therefore, the academics only vaguely expressed a certain degree of support for the Dongqing clan. Of course, it was only a very subtle support. The president couldn't completely stand behind Dongqing Wudi to support him, at least not now, because there was no clear result of all these conflicts. The president was now visiting abroad. When the maneuver of the two academies was over and everything was settled, he would come back to clean up the mess. At that time, if the Dongqing clan couldn't hold on, then the implicit support of the academics would naturally disappear, and the president would stand in the position of Kunlun City and the Wang family of Beihai to suppress the Dongqing clan. But if the Dongqing clan could continue to be strong, then the implicit support of the academics would become real support. President Li Huaqing personally expressed his position, and Dongqing Wudi's private transfer of troops would be reduced to a small matter. Of course, no matter how this matter was reduced to a small matter, the Dongqing clan would hand over the leadership of the entire border control corps. Repetition, capriciousness, cooperation, betrayal, deal, balance, compromise, all the words combined in the general trend. In fact, there was only one word: politics. Wang Tianzong took a deep look at Zhuang Huayang and slowly sat in his seat. The Sword Emperor never lowered his head. So he didn't speak. His meaning was obvious. He wouldn't take action now, but he still didn't give up the plan to kill Li Tianlan. Dongqing Wudi narrowed his eyes. He moved his body, stepped on the railing, crossed the air, and landed directly in front of Li Tianlan. The 40,000 troops turned around at the same time, and their eyes fell on Dongqing Wudi. Dongqing Wudi looked at Li Tianlan quietly. Li Tianlan and Dongqing Wudi looked at each other. There was no emotion or joy in his eyes, but there was a kind of look that Dongqing Wudi wanted to see the most. It was an indescribable intimacy. Li Tianlan's heart was unprecedentedly agitated. He heard Dongqing Wudi's declaration that shocked the whole audience. He heard the 40,000 troops' hot-blooded and heroic oath to die at the same time. That was the Dongqing clan's most frank and truest attitude. It was the greatest kindness. That kind of kindness wrapped around him so tightly that he almost couldn't breathe. It was not until this moment that Li Tianlan realized that his so-called hesitation and uneasiness were actually illusory. When the Dongqing clan really stood in front of him at all costs to block all the wind and rain, he had no choice but to accept all this. All the protection and all the responsibilities. The corner of Li Tianlan's mouth moved. He wanted to say something, but he couldn't say anything. He could only bow deeply to Dongqing Wudi. Dongqing Wudi reached out to hold Li Tianlan. He pointed to the 40,000 troops behind him and said calmly, "You don't owe the Dongqing clan anything. But you owe them." "Yes." Li Tianlan nodded, raised his hand to salute the 40,000 most dedicated and fanatical elite soldiers. The 40,000 people raised their hands to salute back at the same time. It was a silent and depressing picture, but also extremely restless and fanatical. It was silent like a kind of inheritance. "I will give everything back to the Dongqing clan. No matter what you will lose today, Marshal." Li Tianlan put down his arm and looked at Dongqing Wudi's face, which looked a little young because of its cleanliness. "As long as I am alive, the Dongqing clan will never be dimmed in the future." His face was solemn. "This is my promise." "This shouldn't be your promise." Dongqing Wudi's expression was complicated. He patted Li Tianlan on the shoulder and whispered, "It should be yours." He paused and didn't go on. He just chuckled and said, "Come on, maneuver. As long as you can win, the Li family will completely usher in a new life today. Everyone participating in today's maneuver is your enemy. Come on. No matter what situation you are in, outside the field, tens of thousands of people's eyes will be watching you." Li Tianlan nodded. Wang Tianzong and Gu Xingyun also appeared in front of Wang Xingxiao and Gu Hanshan. "Dad, don't worry." Wang Xingxiao looked calm and firm. "I will do whatever it takes." Wang Tianzong nodded and said calmly, "Be careful. Destroy him." Gu Xingyun stood in front of Gu Hanshan and said in a hoarse and cold tone, "What's wrong with letting him live? Destroy him completely today. You must do it." "Don't worry." Gu Hanshan whispered, "We can do it." This was also their confidence to participate in the final maneuver. After all, Li Tianlan was alone. And what he would face was the joint efforts of several teams. What Li Tianlan didn't know was that after he showed his invincible realm combat power, within a few days, Gu Hanshan had broken through from the stabilization phase of the Thundershocking realm to the peak of the Thundershocking realm. And Jiang Shangyu, who had been suppressed in the Fire Flaming realm for 3 years, also directly broke the realm. With the accumulation, he rushed to the stabilization phase of the thundershocking realm in one fell swoop. When the three of them joined forces, they were definitely not weaker than Li Tianlan. Even if Li Tianlan had the invincible realm combat power, the three of them joined forces to win more than 60%. The three giants returned to the stands. Gu Xingyun waved his hand at Zhuang Huayang, signaling the start of the maneuver. Zhuang Huayang, who originally wanted to make an opening remark, suddenly didn't know what to say. He held the microphone, hesitated, and finally smiled, waved his hand and said directly, "The maneuver begins. Maneuver content: strength is respected." Everyone entered the maneuver area at the same time. There were no rules and no time limit. Everyone hunted freely with their own means. The individual and the team that won in the end would be the first place of this team maneuver. A maneuver content without the slightest reason. All the trainees silently entered the dense forest on the edge of the maneuver area from different directions. Li Tianlan's heart was like a raging fire, but his face was as cold as ice. He entered the maneuver area. For a moment, almost all the cameras were capturing Li Tianlan. Because he was the only villain in this maneuver. Li Tianlan's figure, standing quietly, appeared on the big screen. The maneuver area was very large. There were roads all around him and there were no enemies. To the left, or to the right. Under the gaze of all the people on the high platform, Li Tianlan reached out and casually broke a branch on the tree next to him. He held the branch in his hand. His posture was like holding a sword. The next moment all the people on the high platform suddenly stirred. In the uproar, not only Gu Xingyun, but even Wang Tianzong suddenly stood up from his seat. Chapter 375. Li Tianlan didn't know how many people were watching this maneuver. Those who were at the scene couldn't be there because of other things, but they still paid attention to this place as well as other forces outside Jianghu State. This could be said to be the most boring maneuver since the establishment of the Sky Academy and the Deep Sea Academy. But it could also be said to be the most widely watched maneuver since the establishment of the two academies. In the past, the team maneuvers were all exciting from the beginning. Alliances, cooperation, betrayal, conflicts, battles, dozens of teams, all kinds of plots were constantly staged. The maneuvers were always changing at a fast pace. It was difficult to guess the real result until the last moment. But this maneuver was completely different from the past. This was the one with the largest number of teams abstaining from the maneuver, the one with the fewest participants, and the one with the simplest and clearest positions of the students. There was no multi-party game in this maneuver. There were only friends and enemies. Dozens of teams in the two academies, most of them abstained. Only 7 teams participated in this maneuver, with a total of 106 people. East Emperor Palace, Phantom Palace, 3000 World, Gile Peak, Blizzard, Elite and Giant Whirlpool. The 6 teams had a total of 105 people. East Emperor Palace had only 1 person. Between friends and enemies. Such a contrast meant that this maneuver would either have the highest death rate in previous maneuvers or the lowest death rate in previous maneuvers. In the team maneuver, each person had 10 credits. Abstaining, serious injury and death were all credits. If Li Tianlan alone defeated everyone, the accumulated credits plus the 2,000 credits of the first place in the maneuver would be more than 3,000 credits. These credits would be counted in East Emperor Palace, and eventually exceed the sum of all the credits of the other 3 forces of the young generation. At that time the final maneuver would end early. In other words, the competition for the first place in the maneuver would end early. This was indeed a very boring thing. But boredom was also worth paying attention to. Everyone was concerned about the grievances between the Wang family of Beihai, Kunlun City, and the Li family. They were concerned about the life and death of several young heavenly sons in Jianghu State. They were concerned about the turmoil after the Giant Group, the Southeast Group and the Special Warfare Group completely fell out with each other. They were concerned about the potential of several young people who would become the peak combat power of Jianghu State 20 years later. This maneuver was boring but it was exciting enough. Li Tianlan could almost feel the pairs of eyes falling on the big screen outside the maneuver area. Behind those gazes were enemies, friends, possible investments, and uncertain murderous intents. If he could defeat the 6 great teams today, he would have the qualifications to obtain a higher status than everyone else in the 6 great teams combined. The Li family was still there. Li Tianlan, who had shown enough strength and the strong support of the Dongqing clan, would bring real confidence to countless people. At the very least, he would no longer be the young man who only had potential but no support in the eyes of others. Behind him was the Dongqing clan. From the moment the 40,000 elites of the Border Control Corps rushed into the Sky Academy, Li Tianlan knew that the future of the Dongqing clan, like the future of the Li family, would become his responsibility. He couldn't escape and he couldn't. He had to carry the Li family and even the entire Dongqing clan with his sword. He knew his sword would. But the others didn't know. Therefore, in this maneuver, Li Tianlan wanted the whole world to see his sword. A sword was a sword. There was nothing to hide. The dense forest in the maneuver area was extremely quiet. This area was very large, but there were very few participants. It was difficult for people who entered the maneuver area from different directions to gather at once. Students participating in the maneuver were allowed to bring cold weapons into the field, but they were not given any firearms, ammunition, or communication devices. All the weapons and communication devices were scattered in the maneuver area. The weapons were taken by themselves. Not long after Li Tianlan moved forward in the woods, he saw a sniper rifle and a few bullets casually thrown on the grass. Li Tianlan didn't even bother to look at it. He stepped on the sniper rifle and continued to move forward. The maneuver of the two academies was still carried out according to the previous ancient rules. But the students participating in today's maneuver were all real experts and elites. Few of them could use guns. And they were dealing with Li Tianlan. At Li Tianlan's level of strength, only a few special weapons and ordinary high-power sniper rifles could pose a certain threat unless the muzzle was pointed at Li Tianlan. Less than a dozen meters ahead, Li Tianlan found a military multi-channel communicator. The communicator was on. Li Tianlan adjusted several channels. After getting no news, he crushed it. He stood where he was and began to think about what he would do if he were Wang Xingxiao and Gu Hanshan. The maneuver area was too large for people to gather for the time being. Although communication equipment could be found on the ground, it was difficult to contact each other through multiple channels. The most important thing to do was naturally to gather. Everyone had seen the environment of the maneuver area on the big screen. The woods, the pool, the warehouse, and the teaching building. The jungle environment was similar, so the gathering place couldn't be here. The pool was in the forest, neither too big nor too small. Even those who were familiar with the Sky Academy could not locate it accurately for a while. Only the teaching building and the warehouse, which were next to each other, were located in the center of the maneuver area, which was the easiest place to locate. The most likely gathering place of the 6 teams could only be the warehouse and the teaching building, which were almost next to each other. The other side had an absolute advantage. Gathering people together first, distributing communication equipment, and completing the grouping, spreading out to search with the warehouse and the teaching building as the center was the most reasonable arrangement. It could even be said that it was the only arrangement that could be done. Li Tianlan looked around and suddenly smiled. The jungle was very dense and the surrounding environment was almost the same. Only the sun in the sky could distinguish the direction. Judging from the scale of the maneuver area, it would take at least 2 hours for the other side to gather everyone together again. At this time, Li Tianlan could almost walk through the entire maneuver area alone. Li Tianlan gently raised the corner of his mouth. He shook the branch in his hand to the sky. The gently swaying branch appeared on the screen in front of stand number 3, almost occupying the entire screen. The uproar on the stand had not dissipated. Wang Qianzong and Gu Xingyun stood expressionlessly, looking at the screen in front of them. Beside them, Dongqing Wudi suddenly laughed wildly after a brief surprise, baring his teeth and brandishing his claws. Everyone was looking at the screen. Everyone, including the 40,000 elite soldiers, looked as if they had seen a ghost. Everyone saw Li Tianlan's sword, even his invincible realm, and his road to the Chosen One. From this moment on, the name of the Chosen One seemed to have become really undisputed. The premise was that Li Tianlan could survive. Wang Qianzong slowly sat down, his face silent. He found that he had underestimated the young man after all. The big screen was divided into countless small screens. There were figures flashing on each small screen. Wang Xingxiao was rushing forward. Gu Hanshan was charging forward with all his strength. Li Tianlan was also moving forward quickly. Everyone was charging in the same direction. What was reflected on all the small screens was a tense and silent picture. But all of this lost its meaning in Wang Tianzong's eyes. In his eyes, this high-profile maneuver. From the moment Li Tianlan stepped into the maneuver area. From the moment he broke off the branch. The outcome was already doomed. I'm really stupid today. Really? Alright, less today. My mind is in a mess and I'm in a bad state. I've stayed up late for more than 2 months. I feel that I need to adjust my schedule. Chapter 376. The dilapidated warehouse and the abandoned teaching building were hidden in the middle of the dense forest. It was rarely visited and it was eerily quiet. This was the first teaching building and warehouse of the Sky Academy when it was first established. Later, as the two academies recruited more and more people, the teaching building and dormitory area of the Sky Academy were constantly expanded, and the location was also changed. When Zhuang Huayang became the headmaster, this place was officially abandoned, and the whole area nearby was also isolated by the forest, becoming one of the candidate areas for the two academies' team to perform. It had just rained. The sun on the horizon shone through the shadow of the dense forest. The dense forest was very dense, so the sunlight in the forest looked like a belt of light all over the dense forest. The rain and dew in the forest had not dried up. The rain and dew on the grass and treetops slowly slid down and fell to the ground. The sound was soft and a little dull. There was no sound of insects in the forest and it was silent. He carefully moved forward in the forest. All the vague sword intent covered his whole body, and only occasionally a faint blue arc of light flashed on his body. In front of him, the gap between the trees was getting wider and wider. He walked carefully, and the warehouse and the teaching building had already appeared in front of him. He took a deep breath gently. Instead of relaxing, his face became more cautious. He looked back at the road he had walked all the way. The forest was a little wet after the rain last night, but he left no footprints along the way. But some of the exposed grass was destroyed and fell to the ground. He frowned and flicked his fingers. There was a sound of ice freezing in the air. The ice that suddenly appeared was very thin, and it turned into some water droplets in an instant. The water droplets fell evenly on the grass behind him. The water vapor was dense and there were raindrops on the grass. He watched quietly until he could not find any traces of his passing, and then he was relieved. The teaching building and the warehouse in front were still quiet. He lowered his body and moved faster, but his movements became more cautious. He began to charge forward. Ice and fire bloomed around him at the same time. The raindrops on the bushes and treetops dripped down as he moved forward, and were immediately replenished by the dew formed by the ice cubes. Along the way he did not leave any traces behind him at all. He moved forward 500 meters. The forest became sparser, and the warehouse and the teaching building became completely clear. The forest also came to the edge. The vigilance in his eyes did not fade at all, but became clearer. He did not know what was in the warehouse and the teaching building ahead. It might be one of his own. But it was also possible that they were enemies. He only had one enemy, but it was so powerful that he had nothing to say. In this extremely intense but simple maneuver, as the side with more people, the meaning of the warehouse and the teaching building was self-evident. This was the best and easiest rendezvous point. But their enemy? The enemy who was only 22 years old but already had invincible combat power. With his strength, he had no doubt that the enemy would not have the courage to rush here directly. He stopped and began to move horizontally at the edge of the forest, carefully observing every area and every tree. A scratch suddenly appeared on one of the thickest trees nearby. There were a few small spots below the scratches. His brows furrowed and his entire body relaxed. This was a team maneuver of more than 100 people against one person. Under the circumstance that no communication equipment was allowed, everyone entered the field in different positions. Before a complete communication network was established, their team advantage was actually not great. It could even be said that they were fighting on their own. Without any equipment that could communicate at any time, some simple markings became the most efficient method of communication. There were 4 types of signals. It was simple. A scratch represented a leader. A simple point represented an ordinary elite. A question mark meant that no target was found. An exclamation mark meant that the target had appeared in the marked position. Now what appeared on the tree trunk was a scratch with 6 dots. Their appearance here completely showed that a leader and 6 elites had already assembled in the teaching building and warehouse area ahead. There were only 3 so-called leaders in this maneuver: Wang Xingxiao, Gu Hanshan, and Jiang Shangyu. The others were all ordinary elites that could be represented by 1 point. Now one of the 3 leaders had arrived at the rendezvous point ahead of the 6 elites, but there was no battle. This was almost the first step for them to integrate the advantages of the team. He chuckled softly. His entire body relaxed as he subconsciously took a step forward. What do these symbols represent? A voice suddenly sounded, soft and gentle. This voice was so abrupt and so close that it almost sounded in his ear. In a situation where he was not mentally prepared, this voice carried an incomparably strong sense of horror. An indescribable chill instantly rushed from his feet to his brain. His scalp was numb, and his whole body instinctively burst out the lightning and sword intent that had been accumulated in his body for a long time. Dense bolts of lightning with sharp sword intent appeared in an instant. His somewhat plump figure immediately turned a deep blue. However, before the deep blue had time to spread, a soft wind cut through the air. In his sight, a slender but weak branch waved over casually. It was a branch that was casually broken off from a tree. The branch was very thin, soft, and long, and there were even a few leaves on the front end. The dew on the leaves had disappeared, but the leaves were still wet and looked extremely green. The branch, which seemed to be unable to withstand any force, casually waved into the lightning. In silence, all the sword intent suddenly dissipated, and the lightning that had not had time to spread disappeared in a trance. The slender and weak branch fell on his shoulder. When the branch waved over, it was very weak. When it fell on his shoulder, it was also very weak. But in his feeling, the branch was as heavy as a mountain, and it suddenly and directly destroyed all his defenses. Bang! Under the great pressure, his body uncontrollably knelt down on one knee. Crack! His thick and powerful arms suddenly snapped, and the bones in his shoulder were even more so shattered. The branch was still quietly placed on his shoulder. Because it touched something, the flexible branch bent. The wind blew over, and the green leaves on the branch swayed gently. He looked at the branch with a dull face and even forgot the pain. He had no idea where the force that completely crushed him and directly destroyed his arm came from. The lightning completely dissipated. The sharp pain finally began to spread from his shoulder. His eyes darkened and his face was pale. In his somewhat blurred vision, a figure was standing quietly in front of him, putting the branch on his shoulder, looking at the scratches and 6 small spots on the trunk in front of him. Black trousers, casual leather shoes, short hair, and a white shirt. He stood quietly, not arrogant, not strong, not fierce, but with a kind of indescribable evil like a demon. He didn't get an answer, so he casually answered, took back the branch and asked again, "What do these symbols represent?" Li Tianlan? He tightly covered his broken arm and laughed bitterly. Looking at the enemy who appeared beside him out of nowhere, he only felt that everything around him seemed too unrealistic. Li Tianlan glanced at him and seemed to feel that the fat man in front of him was a little familiar. He raised his eyebrows and said, "What's your name?" The fat man didn't say anything. Under the huge gap in strength, he didn't even feel humiliated, only astonishment and disbelief. In a trance, he still remembered the entrance maneuver in the spring 3 years ago. When he first saw Li Tianlan in the entrance maneuver, although he was kind, he still looked down on him. It had only been 3 years, but the other party even forgot his name. A master of the thunder-shocking realm? He suddenly felt that in the eyes of the other party, he was a non-entity of the thunder-shocking realm. "I'm Fan Haoyu," the fat man said in a low voice. "We've met before, the entrance maneuver. And the final battle of Heaven Capital. Fan Haoyu, a senior student of the Sky Academy. In this team collaborative combat maneuver, he was the elite leader of one of the 7 teams. "Oh," Li Tianlan said, thought for a moment and said, "You're Yuetong's friend." He shook the branch in his hand, thought again and added, "You're the son of Minister Fan Tianyin?" Fan Tianyin. One of the core figures of the Southeast faction, the minister of the Ministry of Security of Jianghu State. Yes. Fan Haoyu looked at Li Tianlan calmly. He used to be familiar with Li Tianlan. He was still familiar with him now. But the natural position was there. No matter how familiar they were still enemies. "Your father saved your life." Li Tianlan said, "I won't kill you. But Minister Fan owes me a favor. After the maneuver, I'll get it at the right time." His tone was flat without any ups and downs. The corner of Fan Haoyu's mouth moved, but he didn't know what to say. Li Tianlan's tone was too flat, as if he said that Fan Tianyin owed him a favor, and then he really owed him a favor. He didn't say what would happen if the Fan family didn't admit it. He went to ask for a favor. If he couldn't get it, he could pay with his life. Fan Haoyu experienced Li Tianlan's style for the first time. He was not arrogant and domineering, nor was he hysterical. He was calm and indifferent, but he had an irresistible strength. "Your people are good at hiding. I came all the way here, and you're the 5th person I met. It's a little less." Li Tianlan raised the branch in his hand and scratched the thick trunk with the mark. The branch bent without any force. But the thick tree shook violently and then suddenly cracked. The trunk tilted to both sides, and the almost completely invisible sword intent swept through the whole tree. The lush canopy. The straight tree trunk instantly turned into countless splinters. Before the debris fell to the ground, it had completely disappeared in the air. Fan Haoyu only felt a tingling in his scalp and asked subconsciously, "Where are the other 4 people?" Li Tianlan walked past him and said lightly, "They're not very lucky. None of them has a father like your father." Fan Haoyu sat on the ground in a daze. The moment the branch in Li Tianlan's hand broke his countless thunder sword intent, all his toughness and pride seemed to have completely disappeared. Looking at Li Tianlan's back walking into the teaching building, he didn't feel the so-called humiliation, but the most helpless powerlessness. Li Tianlan continued to move forward. When he was about to walk out of the woods, he saw a marked tree again. It was also a scratch. However, there were slightly more dots at the bottom. Li Tianlan didn't know what these marks represented. But now he was sure that these marks represented the way other teams contacted each other. This also meant that the teaching building and the warehouse in front were no longer in a state of no one, and even had traps. For Li Tianlan it was enough to know this. Li Tianlan walked out of the edge of the woods in silence. There was an open space outside the edge of the woods. The warehouse and the teaching building stood there quietly in silence. The morning sun shone unscrupulously on the open space, bright and warm. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes, glanced at the warehouse and the teaching building and went straight forward. The branch was still in his hand. He raised his hand and casually pulled off a green leaf from the branch. Wang Xingxiao could clearly see Li Tianlan's movements. There was no distance in the world of binoculars. Looking down, Wang Xingxiao could even see every expression on Li Tianlan's face and count every leaf on the branch in his hand. But there was no joy or excitement on his face. "He's coming." Wang Xingxiao held the binoculars and said in a flat tone. "So fast." Jianghu, who arrived almost at the same time as Wang Xingxiao, was meditating. Hearing Wang Xingxiao's words, he opened his eyes in astonishment. "Mount Han hasn't arrived yet." Wang Xingxiao put down the binoculars in silence and said nothing. He knew that Li Tianlan would definitely choose to come here, but he didn't expect it to be so fast. If Li Tianlan had come 10 minutes later, they would have been more prepared. "I can hold him for a while." Behind Wang Xingxiao, a burly young man stood up and said calmly, "Ma Shua." Wang Xingxiao frowned and wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. "There's no other way." The young man said calmly, "I'll take my people to hold him. When all our people are here, the rest is up to you. Your role is not to be the vanguard." Wang Xingxiao said. "Neither are you and Jiang Shanyu." Qin Mashua said blandly. He was burly and strong, but his name was a little feminine. But in this session of the 2 academies, no one dared to look down on him. He was a young genius who was only slightly lower than Song Xiai and Jiang Shanyu in the hearts of the higher-ups. He was the leader of the Deep Sea Academy and the Blizzard. At the same time, he was also a young genius who approached Wang Xingxiao without hesitation after Wang Xingxiao joined the Shadow Organization. Even though he knew that Li Tianlan had the combat capability of the Invincible Realm, he did not flinch at all. In this maneuver his role was equally crucial. Except for them, no one knew what they had prepared in this maneuver to deal with Li Tianlan. The 3 young chosen ones were indeed a luxurious lineup. If they cooperated well and stood on top of each other, they would not be weaker than Li Tianlan. But not weaker than Li Tianlan was not their goal. What they wanted was to win. So in this maneuver, in addition to the 3 young chosen ones, Kunlun City and the Wang family of Beihai also prepared 2 sets of sword formations. The sword formation of Kunlun City was famous in the Dark World. But this time, one of the 2 sets of sword formations belonged to the Wang family of Beihai. Qin Mashua's role. He was the core figure in the sword formation of the Wang family of Beihai. The Wang family of Beihai had the Heaven Punishment Troop, which represented the most elite and terrifying conventional force of the Wang family of Beihai. In this maneuver, the sword formation of the Wang family of Beihai came from the Heaven Punishment Troop. This was also one of the trump cards of this maneuver. The Heaven Punishment Sword Formation. 1 Sword Punishment. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.